Hey there, Internet friends. Trevor Starkey here, welcoming you to episode 9 of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the teams from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. Joining me this week, we have Christian Puente.
Hello.
Hello, Christian. And Cameron Abbott.
Hey, what's going on?
What's going on, you guys? If you enjoy what you're about to hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast everywhere you can. We're on iTunes, Spotify. You can watch us on YouTube if you want, even though you won't see our lovely faces. If you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. We didn't have any new patrons this week, but if you do, we'll shout you out on a welcome episode kind of every time we get new people coming into the community. So
you could be the first name we read next year. You know.
Indeed, yeah, yep, because this will be going out tomorrow as we record this. So yep, you could be the first 2020 Patreon shouted out in the next week's episode if you go to patreon.com/thatnerdysite and join us today. So let us dive right in. Obviously, I think we're all busy with end of the year stuff. And Christian, one of the things you're working on or have worked on recently is you did a top 10 films for every year of the decade, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard for me to rank stuff, and so I try to go more calculative, more mathematical. And so I was like, for my top 10 of the decade, let me just do a top 10 list of each year, and I'll just take my number one pick, and then that'll be my top 10. Spoilers, that is not going to be my top 10 after all. Ben kind of talked to me, and I was like, you know what? I see, like, he appreciated probably the spirit of what I was trying to do, but he talked me into being like, nah, let's just really embrace overall of the decade. So I'm going to be working the final top 10 of the decade, but in general, like, making top 10s of each year for the last 10 years is going to help me a lot. And it was just a fun, but also like, it was a fun, but also kind of stressful being like, man, like going back and so the weird thing about, so the extra little spice to my list is that I do watch a lot of anime movies, and those have their own weird releases. Like, oh, well, technically I had a festival, and that's where I saw it, but then it didn't release it next year. And so just working those things out. I also like foreign films a lot too, and so there's this different Japanese or German films that'll come out, and I'm like, oh, that one came out this year, but maybe it goes next year because that's when everyone else saw it on DVD, or this is when it came to Netflix. So it's the fact that, so it's funny that like the fact that I'm watching anime and foreign films is like really tricking. It's really throwing me for a loop on some of these lists. But in general, it's been a lot of fun revisiting like some of my favorite movies and being like, oh wow, like, and seeing how different years compare and being like, whoa, this year really sucked. This year like really had a lot of standouts. And I've been I've been doing a lot of writing. I haven't talked about it recently, but I've just been writing more stories, and it's been kind of fun looking at these lists, looking at these different movies, and thinking about how what kind of movies influence me most, you know, when making my stories. And so it's been a fun experience. A lot of people in our circles are doing a lot of games, but I think like I'm really hitting the films hard. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm planning on for the site sometime throughout the course of January. I'm gonna have my top 10 games for the year, as well as movies, and then also even TV shows. I thought there were some really standouts that I want to kind of celebrate for the year. So I love that, and I can fully appreciate the struggles that you're facing of like when to count a year or when to count a movie as like released. Like one of the ones that I'm honestly like super excited about that is in like limited release right now is 1917, but it's not gonna get like a full release until like mid-January, I think. So like that's not when I'm gonna get to see it. And I'm like, oh man, that could be in the running for 2019 movies of the year kind of thing, but like I'm gonna have to consider it next year. Or I think back to a couple years ago where I wanted to see Lady Bird, but for whatever reason I didn't get around to it until like a few weeks into the new year. So it missed my cutoff for like I want to say that would have been 2017 like top 10 movies. But then when I saw it early in January that year, it was like, oh, that definitely would have like topped my list as like favorite movie of that year had I seen it that year. So at least in these kind of like retrospective things, you can go back and say, okay, well, now that I'm looking at it, here's the lens I'm going to put this through. These are movies based on whatever release date you want to pick, and you can
Hmm.
say, okay, this is how I'm going to stack those up. So, and I appreciate that even though so you kind of came in with the idea of you're going to do top 10 for every year, and then you're going to pick your number one, and that's going to be your top 10 movies of the decade.
Yeah.
Um, even though you're not doing that anymore, you still got basically like 100 movies in your brain right now
Yeah.
of like, okay, so now I need to narrow those down to like what are the real top tens,
Hmm.
and like versus like I would go if I were to do this exercise, I'd be like, okay, I got to remember what movies came out in 2010 and
Hmm.
2011, and like just go through that exercise first. So at least you've already done like the
The hard
I
part.
would say the legwork on really looking at the full decade. Because yeah,
Wikipedia has been a
it's
great resource for that.
yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And that's one of those like I certainly think about like maybe I'll throw my hat in that ring of like here are my top 10 movies of the decade, but
Hmm.
at the same time I'm like, I feel like I didn't really get into films until maybe
Mm.
halfway through the decade, so
Yeah.
I missed a whole bunch of like really good stuff in the first few years, I'm sure. And
Similarly, like I don't watch a lot of TV, so that's why I don't have a list. Like I do like as far as American TV, obviously I watch a lot of anime, and I did catch the major like big shows like Breaking Bad, a lot of Walking Dead, Game of Thrones. But there's a lot of like I believe like really high quality TV out there that I just haven't made a chance for because I don't watch very seasonal content like those the ones that I have just mentioned, like those are like the exceptions. But
yeah.
I totally admit that, yeah, there's like The Good Place. I would have loved to make time for that. I did see the first season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but I know that it went on to do more seasons. It's just hard to find time for me personally, anyways, to catch this, this new era of television. But
Oh yeah,
that's
no, I
why it's cool that I can
totally
check
get
out
that.
those lists and from everyone else and be like, oh, maybe this year I can Netflix that or this or that.
Yeah, it helps. All these lists will help us add to our backlogs of
Right.
like, oh, here's the shows that I want to see based on all these recommendations, but didn't get around to this
And the funny
year.
thing about the funny thing about lists is that my perspective, anyways, or what I gather from looking at everyone else's list is like I think a lot of people approach it very like these were like the top 10 like these are like what you. I'm I usually when I make a list, I usually make it for myself. Just like these are my most enjoyable, or these are my most rewatchable, or this is like that's usually the approach I take. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, like they want to see like what would I think are the quote unquote objectively. I know that like
Hmm.
ranking isn't objective; it's subjective, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like so it's interesting like figuring out like my approach to like how am I picking these because like my instinct is to go with more emotion, but I think a lot of people are interested in like what are you considering like the best, not like what do you want to see the most or what was your most fun, but like what was like as far as a production from a production standpoint, what are the best ones. And so it's kind of interesting asking myself those questions, like
Oh,
how
certainly.
do I
Cameron and I finished. We recorded the last episode of our first season of the video game list ranking
oh
show
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right,
yesterday.
congrats guys.
Um, and it got very heated especially as we came down to like the final three in terms
Mm.
of which of those games is the best, especially considering like we were looking at like Frank's favorite game and my favorite game and Logan's favorite game and so what was really the the top tier? How do we argue and like I would say at least two completely different genres. So how do you really rank one against the other? And without like very clearly defined criteria or whatever, and it is largely driven by like here are the games that like we like, and here are the games that each person individually likes. Um, it it becomes hard of like okay, well yeah, we could throw criteria on here to say like okay, overall critical consensus. If you want to
Hmm.
like if you take your list of movies and say, okay, I'm just going to rank these based off of what the Rotten Tomatoes score is, that's a
Hmm.
way to go. But that's not necessarily going to that's not going to reflect you so much
Right.
as Rotten
Hmm.
Tomatoes. So like I'm always for kind of whatever criteria you want to set forth, and like it is very subjective. you could rank things one day and that's your list, and then you look back on it a year from now and you say, oh, actually, like thinking back on it, here these games or these movies or whatever have actually like stuck with me longer than
Hmm.
I thought they would in the moment.
I
That's
got.
one of the things I love doing is every year as part of my like game of the year stuff, I do like a retrospective look back
Hmm.
at, well, here were my top 10 games from last year. How do I feel about those games now? Did they
Mm.
like would I still rank it this way, or would I have, shifted things around a little
Yeah, I kind of had that recently. I was going through Wikipedia, making these lists, so obviously 2017 was one of those years. And so once I had all the 100 films, I went to Letterbox to make the visual representations of the list. And in Letterbox, the only year I ever made a top 10 with the app was in 2017, and so it was fun getting to do that, comparing what were my fresh takes on like my top 10 of that year and comparing them to what my top 10 picks were during that
bit?
actual year. And yeah, there were some changes as far as like, for example, The Big Sick made it my top 10 that year, and then retroactively now it's off of that. That's one of them that
Yeah,
I changed.
I feel like I saw Baby Driver, which at the time was my like favorite movie of 2017. Like I
Mm.
said, Lady Bird then would have supplanted it a couple weeks later, but I feel like it was on one of your lists and then not
Yeah,
on the
Baby
other.
Driver. Yeah, that one also did get removed, just because it's it's not. I mean, I think a lot of people would think maybe it's just the Kevin Spacey thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, that
I
does
mean,
kind
it
of
definitely
paint.
complicates
Yeah, it definitely
that movie's
complicates things.
legacy.
But the more I think about Baby Driver, and this isn't a film podcast, so we don't got to get too into it. But the more I think about it, it's just like, it just. I'm really so fresh. I don't remember what's the main character's name?
Baby?
Edgerton. Okay, baby. That's right. Man, I'm not paying attention at all. Like, baby's decisions are just so frustrating. And I know he's painted as a protagonist, but I feel like he is unwittingly doing more harm than good. Like, if
Mm,
you put him and Jamie Foxx together, like obviously, yeah, Jamie Foxx is the worst of those characters, but he still is like, I feel like he has so many opportunities to leave. Kevin Spacey's character even says, "You know what? We're not gonna do this. Like, things are getting weird. Let's not do this." And he's the one that insisted, like, "No, let's do it." And that's when everything turned apart. Again, not a film podcast, so we can talk about that later. But that's just an
yeah,
example of why, looking back, it's a little hard to appreciate that film, because I really like John Hamm's character a lot, and I think that Baby like completely threw him under the bus and ruined his life.
He did.
yeah.
But isn't that the
I
point?
mean,
That's why he goes after him in revenge, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's needless. Like, you had an out. Everyone had an out, and then you insisted on going through with this and,
Yeah, I don't know, man.
turned everything upside down.
I have only read the Wikipedia page because I can't stand to watch anything with Kevin Spacey in it still. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think we've talked about that.
yeah.
Cam and I.
yeah, Trevor and I have talked about it in length before, like personally, like it was, I'm still at the point where, depending on the level of awfulness, like whether or not I'm able to appreciate the art when one of the artists is basically, my feeling is I don't want to give a penny to somebody if he has like a back end royalty deal. I don't want to give a penny to somebody who's terrible. So
Yeah.
that's just so I haven't been able to see it. But
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
but
No,
but
I get that.
I'll trust your judgment on it.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
one that
And yeah, I
it's
didn't mean to
interesting.
yeah.
Like that movie in particular is interesting for me because Logan came out and visited like early 2018 for his like birthday adventure that year, and we ended up watching it while he was out here. And it was so it was me watching it again and his first time watching it, and that was a movie that like he thought was going in one direction, and then when like the turn happens and all the stuff like with Baby versus Jamie Foxx happens, he was like, oh. So that movie went in a completely different direction, and I just don't think I was along for that ride. Pun fully intended, I guess. But yeah, it was interesting experiencing it with him and kind of talking with him about it after the fact. Coming from like my original views on the movie, and then like help seeing it through a little bit of his lens, also kind of colored, my take on the movie as well. So, but yeah,
Yeah. All that to say, that's just an example of like how looking back, like it's like, yeah, our opinions change, and movies, they hit differently after a while.
yeah, indeed. It's like I always think think well, I've definitely talked with Cameron about it. Like I think of Rent as one of those like quintessential. Like when I got introduced to the musical Rent, I
Hmm.
was like it was my first year of college, and I was like super into like the bohemian, like oh
Mm.
yeah, like I would want to be that kind of artist. And then over the years, as I've gotten older and more mature and more like financially attempting to
Responsible.
be financially stable and stuff, I definitely look at Benny more as like, oh, he's like trying to help everybody out, and they hate him
Yeah.
for it just because he's like the business money guy and whatever. And it's like, no, fuck you all. He's like you can't live off of what you're trying to live off of, and so
Hmm.
like my point of view character in a show like that has changed over the years, and obviously he's painted more as the villain of that piece,
Mm.
as a result of like not being the bohemian that everybody else is trying to be, and so it's like that's one of the certainly most notable examples I can think of how my perspective on a piece of art has changed as I've grown up over the years.
Hmm.
So I remember when Rent came out, like because I was not aware of the well, I was aware of the play production because of the book of series by J.K. Applegate, or the person who wrote the Animorphs books did another series of books. I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been called the Eternals or the Immortals or something like that. But anyway, the point is that one of the characters talks about being Mimi and Rent, and that caught my eye. And that so later when the film was announced and everybody was going through Rent fever, I had so by the time I got around to like knowing anything about Rent, I was already working in the food service industry.
Hmm.
And the way that the main characters of that cast treat the working class has always rubbed me the wrong way. Like they where does their protest first start when they don't want to pay their bill for food? It's very much this like it's very much this I like you look at it and you see it through the eyes of these bohemians, and then you realize that they are almost all white.
Hmm.
They do not treat their working class neighbors well. And also the most vocal and the biggest protester among them is financially supported by her corporate lawyer, like significant other, and is also doing it kind of just doing the protest out of spite against out of her poor relationship with Benny. like it's very much like, especially watching it now that you're old, now that I'm older, especially now people like talking about like, oh, I love Rent. It's like I like Rent too, but I don't think like it's kind of like shows the frailties and faults of like the idealistic nature of a bohemian lifestyle versus people who are able to use their art to both create a market for themselves and get paid for their art, as well as like using it to make change. And even if you're not making like influential change in society, I think Mark's character at the end, when he realizes that he has this beautiful piece that he can now put together for Angel, it's just such a like it's that kind of a realization, kind of like a eureka moment for him. And it's a great turn for a lot of people towards the end of that film slash play. But especially when it comes down to it, it turns out Benny's like has that heart of gold still. So
Yeah. Um, that's cool. It's a cool little exercise. So, how's the list shaken out for you then, Christian?
Well, I only got talked into it like last night, so I haven't revisited the
That's
100
fair.
yet.
That's
I've
fair.
been like kind of like I was like, all right, today's my day off. Today being Sunday when we're recording, I was like, I wanted to make a cup of tea, and not be like tired from work or anything like that, and just like approach it, and so that's probably what I'll be hitting up right after we record.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to it. Like I'm gonna have fun with it. I'm gonna have fun with it.
Well, just from your like coming up with top 10 films of each decade, was there a year that stood out as like that was just a phenomenal year of films?
Off the top of my head, I'm having trouble, but I feel like 17 was pretty good. That one was like Coco, Blade Runner 2049. Oh, wait, I actually started like naming some of my favorites. You know what? I don't
Yeah.
care. But like,
No, I
yeah,
mean
like,
like I was just looking at the tweet of your your like original 2017 top 10 compared to your current top 10,
Mm.
and like yeah, like the one of the things that surprised me most was that your name wasn't on it originally, just
Mm.
given like that movie's like prominence in anime. Like it's one that like bled over into I know about your name. I haven't seen it yet, but like that, so that would definitely jumped out as like, oh, feel like that's something that you would have, always had on your list.
And that's goes into the whole release thing because I saw it in 2016 after
Gotcha.
PSX, which was in December. So I caught
Gotcha.
it like at the tail end of 2016, which that's probably why at the time I was like, oh, well, I'd already seen it last year, so it was probably on the 2016 list back in the day. So that's probably why I didn't make it 17. But when remaking the list, I was probably like, you know what, it got its major release in 2017, so now I'll put it with this 10. So that's
Gotcha.
another example of that, how dates, can be kind of funny.
Yeah, but yeah, that was a fun year. Looking at your list there,
I
like
feel
later
like
on
I
you
had a really
said
bad list
Echo.
too. I feel like one year was like kind of really disappointing. I think it was, I think 15.
Mm.
Yeah, like it had some good ones, but like I think 2015 felt a little underwhelming. Um, but
At some point, I need to pick your brain on how to actually create lists in Letterboxd because I've not been able to figure that out yet.
oh yeah, totally.
Oh, I just figured it out. Yeah.
I just figured it out too when I decided. Like, obviously, I'd done it before back then, but I think I might have
Mhm.
just stumbled my way through that. But now that I've had to do like 10 lists, like I kind of got the hang of it now. So,
Gotcha. Yeah.
admittedly, the UI isn't very intuitive and like pointing you how to do that. It's a little weird.
Yeah, it's like I go
Admittedly.
to lists and it just shows me like other people's lists and stuff, and I'm like, well,
There's too
how do I
many
create
steps.
my own?
Yeah, you have to go into the menu, go to your profile, go to lists, and then add a new list. And it's yeah, it's
Yeah, but like even that like lists is grayed out for me, so I can't.
because you don't
And
have any. You need to like there's somewhere there where you need to start a list, and then that's when it won't be grayed out anymore. Like yeah, it's
weird.
not the best. It's
Yeah.
good, and it's probably the most common like app for that kind of thing, but it's admittedly
Yeah,
not
it's
the
it's one of
best.
those I look at and I'm like, do I just have to like because I see everybody else making their lists? Do I just have to
Mhm.
do it like on the website instead of on my phone? Is that how this one works? That seems like a weird design for an app, but okay. So
Hopefully
I
they
will
get
I will further investigate for my own list purposes. But
yeah. If I could do it,
thank you.
I'm pretty technology phobic, or I don't know, like I don't know, technology scares me, which is weird coming from a digital content creator, but but yeah, I'll let you know how it goes. I'll
Cool,
give
cool.
whatever, yeah, help you out with that.
Well, very cool. We will certainly come back to you in a little bit because you and I
Mhm.
have seen a movie recently that I'm excited to
See,
talk to you about. But let's throw it over to Cameron. Cameron, you got a couple things to discuss. Take your pick on which one we want to tackle first.
Yeah, I think so I've been playing a lot of games to kind of catch up with the end of the year.
Yep,
Getting ready for game of the
I
year.
know that feeling.
Yeah, and I found myself kind of actually touching on games that I had otherwise missed, mainly because for people who don't know, 6 months out of this year I was unemployed, and a good chunk of that time I was also like super broke. So there was actually no game buying for me, and so I was basically playing old games or free games, what have you.
yeah,
So basically the end of the year this year has been a big rush towards basically getting into all the games that I missed because I wasn't employed at the time. I've been playing catch up pretty much this entire last half of the year, and I kind of came down to a game that originally I wasn't going to pick up, but it ended up being on sale and I picked it up, called Code Vein. Code Vein is a basically Bandai Namco made an anime Dark Souls game, along with like really cool like designed weapons, and the idea is basically you are a vampire in a post-apocalyptic world where because humans have kind of like been part like most like you are all humans and then you were all turned into vampires by the incident that caused the destruction of the planet, and basically you wake up in the middle of this post-apocalyptic age, with this mysterious young woman, and neither of you have any clue of like who you used to be. You just know she just knows that she's supposed to be by your side, like it's a pre-programmed order, and you are basically trying just to survive. And that starts it off. You end up meeting this character named Louise, and Luis and you and a bunch of other people who are basically these So right now there's a character named Silva who has created like this caste system where thralls collect what's called blood beads, which is essentially this mysterious plant that produces like artificial blood from in the form of like these beads, like these tear beads, and vampires can drink from those to stay off, basically turning into what's called the Lost, which is like basically your generic monsters for the game. They're all mutated. They're all mutated revenants, is what they call. Revenants are what they call the vampires, and it's very cool. It has a very anime story, where like your character with amnesia is somehow has a special ability, and it's very cool. One of the best things about it though is that when you kill somebody or defeat them, you either get a weapon like you get in Dark Souls sometimes, where you get the souls and you can make them into a weapon. But sometimes they also drop what's called a code. And their code is essentially like their soul, like their memories have been fragmented into these pieces of blood that will try to actually take you over and drive you insane. But because your character's special, he or she can actually absorb those memories and kind of like walk through a little corridor where like basically their final thoughts and motivations are kind of revealed. And some of these are people that you have come to know, and like the first one you pick up that's like this is somebody who is a character who basically saves you and then ends up going insane because of it, and you're just like, why did he do that? Like the character is questioned, like, why did he do that? Like, how well did you know him? And then you realize that there's actually like a trauma that he was suffering from, and help him deal with the lingering trauma from that. And so it's this cool little post-mortem like tool to use for that, and it's very cool. But overall, like I've gotten sucked into this game. I was not anticipating it. I kind of just picked up, be like, okay, I'll play like maybe an hour of it, maybe two, and like that'll be enough for me, and I can put it down and go back and play some of these other games like Control or Daemon X Machina or something like that. And sure enough, like it has just like it's got its hooks in me. The mechanic for like very early on, you get the ability to like reset yourself to a they call them missiles, but like mistles, but that's their bonfire equivalent, and you can actually transport yourself back to the last one that you used and retain all your essentially souls. They call them something else in this, but it's basically your soul currency. And it's a early on ability that you can unlock in one of the ones that you get kind of naturally through the story. So the different codes are also aligned with different attributes, sort of like classes. And so you have like, you start off with 3: warrior, hunter, and caster. And then you unlock berserker. So it's very traditional like class-based structure, but that way it prevents the need to abuse like a min-max system like they do in the Souls games. And so rather than just doing I want to level up this, and this for that attribute, they're like, well, we have these predetermined classes, and then you just upgrade your level overall as you go on. And so it's very cool. It's very cool. It has a lot of interesting tweaks to kind of the Souls-based, like Souls genre. It has not only that, but its story stands out as being, while like very much like cheesy in that sense, it's still very cool. So it's just like, I did not anticipate this game, but I always feel like every year there's a game that comes out of nowhere at the very end just to kind of like knock my list up, like just off of its game. And like I remember one year Telltale's Borderlands game, it like totally shook up my entire list that year, because I played it like literally 3 days before I was going on a Game of the Year podcast, and it just like tore my list apart, and I was like, wow, okay. And then Code Vein has kind of done the same. We'll see where it ends up landing, because there's some strict competition of just, and that's the thing, I haven't even ranked my list yet, because it's still like such a competitive way of like who's going to end up making my list.
Yeah, still building it up.
Yeah, 2019's been a good year for games, that's for sure.
It's been like for those of us like me who haven't had a lot of chance to play games, it's just been fun checking out the reactions to like so many titles that caught people by surprise, such as Code Vein did for you, and how much Control and Outer Worlds. I don't even know if I'm saying the right one, if it's Outer Worlds or Outer Wilds, but which one was the one
Outer
that won
Worlds
like
is
the
the
indie?
RPG one.
Okay, that one. Like it's been cool, like from afar, getting to see how many great games have come out, just
Yeah,
based on people's reactions.
and just because like obviously your big game for the year was Kingdom Hearts 3, Christian. How
Yeah.
many times did you end up playing through that game?
2.5. I did end up having some like medical issues at the beginning of the year that didn't end till the end of the year, and so that made even playing a game that I really love, like Kingdom Hearts 3, hard to jump back into. But the new DLC is right around the corner. I'm health issues are all gone, so I'm all good. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the DLC being my game of the year for 2020.
Nice. Yeah, well, I think it'd be interesting to maybe have you, me, or the three of us, and I don't know if Frank really got into Kingdom Hearts, but at least the three of us to sit down with Remind after it comes out and kind of discuss it.
That could be
In
fun.
particular, because like the two of you love that series so much, and me, I loved it like when it first came out, but then I fell super by the wayside. And so,
Well,
like,
yeah, a
me,
lot of good stuff came out this year. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, like, just me coming back to it. Like, I played through Kingdom Hearts 3, but, like, like, you two, Christian and Cameron, like, are super into the lore and all of the other games that came out in the series and all that stuff. And, like, I have a tangential knowledge of all that stuff, but so much of
Okay.
Kingdom Hearts 3 for me, especially, like, the end game of Kingdom Hearts 3, was, like, a moment after moment of me thinking, oh, I bet Cam and Christian and Alex are
Oh
really
yeah, I
loving
remember
this.
you
Oh, yeah.
mentioning that.
Yeah.
It's like none of it's making any sense to me, but like I know enough about like these characters and them that like they're probably really loving all this stuff.
That'd
So I
be
think
accurate.
that's a
That
fun,
was-
interesting kind of comparison to sit down. And maybe we'll get I know Brandon Gann is also a huge Kingdom Hearts fan, so maybe we'll
sweet.
I'll reach out to him and see if he wants to take part in some kind of like spoiler casty conversation after Remind has come out, because that's one like I look at Remind and I'm like, oh, this definitely just looks like even more stuff geared for you guys
Yeah.
and less so for me. So I'm curious to like dive into that and see how that comes across to not a Kingdom Hearts noob, but like just a nobody like me, I would say.
Hey, I like what you did there.
No, very nice.
Thank you.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, no, I'm really excited, and like no lie, while y'all guys were setting up, like I was watching like I was watching some YouTube reactions of people watching the Remind trailer again, and just
Nice.
like, I'm so hyped.
Well, very cool. I'm glad Code Vein kind of has snuck in here at the end of the year for you, Cameron. I remember I saw that game at PAX West, I think. Like I saw it hanging out in the PlayStation booth over there, and it looked cool. But yeah, as soon as I saw it was like a Soulsborne game, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, nope, bouncing
I,
right out of that.
Yeah,
You
that's
mentioned
fair.
PAX, and they were giving out a manga of like I think it was a prologue or like something that kind of set up like the world, and it was like, as someone who watches more anime than anything, like that was confusing for me. I needed to feel like I felt like I needed to look up the Code Vein Wikipedia or something. But I think that's just I think game to manga adaptations aren't always the best. So it was cool to kind of get a little taste of what I might be in store for if I did play the game, which it is on my radar. If I had more time and stuff, that's one I would have loved to at least check out, just because I really like the aesthetic, like the really gothic Victorian, horror kind of vibe, but wrapped in a nice anime package. Like it seems like my shit. So
I would say it's definitely gothic in the design of a lot of stuff, but I would not say Victorian.
okay, well, I'm
just
ignorant
gothic.
about those kinds.
Oh
of
no,
comparisons, so
it's okay. Victorian, to me, would be like like a societal point to make about like how they built their society. Like if it was like more like a Dickens type like story, I would say yes. And actually, you know what? Now that I say that, there are elements of that in it. Never mind, you're right, Christian. It does have.
I was
a
just
little
talking about
Victorian.
like from the costume design perspective.
Oh yeah, it's Victorian Gothic era for a lot of it, but there's also some like serious like there's you can design your character to look like that, and there are other characters who look like that, but then there's also like serious like wasteland goth vampire stuff as well. There's like techno futuristic looking goth stuff. I have like a very like postmodern, like gothic goth kind of outfit, and then I have like this giant like archaic Victorian era kind of style like cowboy hat that my character wears in every single cutscene, and it's massive and ridiculous. And what's crazy is because it's part of his appearance customization, even when I go into a place where like my character doesn't have his clothes on, like there's a public bath, like an onsen.
Oh, okay.
And the game and your base, and that's where you actually go to like quote unquote like think back to past events that have happened, and that's the way you watch cutscenes that have already happened. That's your cutscene viewer. But what's really funny about that is that my character wears his cowboy hat and glasses into the onsen. It's just like everybody else who's there, because it's also like an online space where you can see other people who are hanging out there and see their avatar, like see their characters that they designed. Like, I'm the only person I've seen with like a hat on.
Well, onsen is definitely on the bingo card of anime tropes so that's
yeah, 100%.
Cool to confirm that they really are diving headfirst into the anime.
And the thing is, it's an onsen made in the rubbles of like it's just like it shouldn't really be there. But it's very
cool. It's on my radar, so hopefully maybe now that I'm feeling a lot better, that's one I can maybe try to make time for next year.
It's fun. It's over the top, it's actiony, but what I really enjoy about it is the like monster design and character designs, and also kind of the idea of a it does kind of it's important to note that this game takes place after basically a massive boss fight that like you weren't involved in, or maybe you were. Like, it's kind of up in the air because you wake up in what's called the Queenslayer equipment, and the Vampire Queen, who basically started the apocalypse, is now dead, but her death has led to like this crazy world that you now live in. And it's like, okay, well, like, how does this all fit in? And I'm still trying to figure that out. That's the story. It's kind of like, what was your part in whatever happened?
Reminds me of Dragon Age Inquisition.
A little bit of that, I would say, just a little bit. But like more on but unlike Dragon Age Inquisition, where it probably should have started you where that happens, it's more. I would actually compare it more so to I'm trying to think what's a good comparison to like the end boss has already been killed, and so now you're like living in the world that happened after, like the result of what happened because they killed the end boss. Mm-hmm. And like what it's basically doing to like destroy the people who are left behind and how they survive. So
it's the world of chaos in Final Fantasy VI.
Yes, that's a way better comparison. Yes.
Very cool. Especially since we talked about that extensively yesterday as well.
Yeah, we did. And then so the next thing that I've been doing is watching The Mandalorian. So Mandalorian ended. Season finale happened.
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Because I want to push through a whole bunch of like my quick little things, and then we'll come back to Christian has Little Women and you have Mandalorian. So
cool.
And I can speak to both of those extensively as well. So we will circle back around to those. But real quick, I just want to dive into, so as you alluded to, Cameron, like end of the year, kind of like that's why you're playing Code Vein. I've been playing through a whole bunch of stuff to try and squeeze in end of the year games for me. And so for me, like Outer Worlds is one I sat down and finished. I'd been streaming that over on our Twitch page for a couple weeks, and then things got busy and it got away from me, but I wanted to go back and finish it. And I was like, I wanted to go into it and just kind of like, all right, this is a Fallout-esque RPG. I just want to like mainline it, get through the rest of the story stuff, so I can move on to other games that I want to finish. And damn it, if the side quests and character like quests didn't pull me in, and I ended up still doing like everything in that game before finishing the game. So that was a ton of fun. Had a great time with that. I very much look forward to seeing them kind of continue with like an Outer Worlds 2, seeing what Obsidian can do with that, as with maybe more resources now from Xbox.
Yeah, there was a part of that game where I found like a spot that like they clearly had like not had the time to like go back over and like retexturize, because it was Like there's a couple spots that you can find in that game where like it slipped past, like it slipped through the cracks, and it's kind of like behind something, and it's like, oh yeah, nope, this is the proof. Like this is 100% like a very very powerful, very good like indie game basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm super excited to see what they get to do when now that they're a Microsoft partner studio.
Yep. I sat down with Untitled Goose Game and Katana Zero, both of which I had like started earlier in the year, back around the time they came out, and then just for whatever reason, probably because like I was playing them on Switch and just don't really play my Switch all that often. I dove away from them, but Untitled Goose Game was on like Xbox Game Pass, and I was like downloading all the games that I wanted to try and squeeze in on my Xbox for end of the year, and so I was like, yeah, I'll throw on Untitled Goose Game. So I played through that again. Really enjoyed that. It's it's a quirky little puzzle game that I think like the social media presence of that game and the memification of it, like for what the game is just like it's a very disproportionate ratio in my mind. But like more power to House for getting all that kind of like mind share of the year. To the to the extent that they had like a tie-in sketch with the Muppets at the Game Awards, which was just a wonderful little thing, and I'd still very much love to see Untitled Beaker Game. Um, and then Katana Zero is one that had like been on my radar since I want to say like GDC 2015 or 2016. Like they came in and did like a little presentation of it on Kind of Funny's GDC coverage one of those years, one of those early years, and I was like, oh, that looks really cool. And then I like it just kind of was in development for the next few years. So when it finally came out this year, I hopped in and enjoyed it, and then it ended up being like more story driven than I was anticipating. So I wasn't in the right like headspace for that at the time, but came back to it. And I really like where that story goes. It's very like neo noir, like Blade Runner-y kind of stuff. And the like the mind fuckery that's going on for your main character is really cool, and yeah, I really enjoyed that and where that game went. Um, Gears 5 is like the biggest one that I've kind of squeezed in here at the end. Um, Really enjoy the campaign and the story of it, and in theory, I like the open world sections that they added, but they feel a little too open and a little too empty to really have worked. I guess I would almost liken it to the like Madagascar section of Uncharted 4, um, which is probably bigger than it needs to be. And there are a couple of them. There are a couple of those kinds of sections here in Gears where it's like, hey, there's like some side things you can go off and do, completely optional. But if you want to do them, you can. And I guess they did that a little bit in Uncharted Lost Legacy too. Um, you can do them in whatever order you want and that stuff, and that was cool. Um, but my issue with the Gears games is always and continues to be that I don't like how heavy and clunky like the controls feel. The combat just always feels like bulkier than I want it to feel, especially in a post Doom 2016 world and upcoming Doom Eternal. Like I just want those games to feel better, and Gears just always feels like it feels like you're playing those characters like you are a ridiculously too large of a person, like mantling over walls and stuff, in super heavy gear and all that stuff, and it's just like, I wish it felt better, to match like the other elements that I like about that game. And then lastly, on the game front, I really tried with Sekiro, um,
Mm.
I
especially
know.
after it won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. I was like, all right, we'll see, like because I'd heard enough about like, oh yeah, it's definitely a Soulsborne, but the combat's faster and more fluid and stuff, and so and I was talking to Cameron about this yesterday a little bit. Like, it tricked me for the first couple hours of that game, or for hour or so. Like, I was having a much better time with it than I had with like my beginnings of Bloodborne, back when I played that, where I was feeling strong enough to take out these guys, and they weren't kicking my ass and all that stuff. Um, and I was enjoying the grappling hook mechanic of being able to bounce around the levels and stuff, and it added a nice little verticality to it that I could, escape if I got in a tough spot or something. And then I started getting to I, I even said I don't think I've reached like a formal boss in the Souls era, or like the Souls style of where you go into like a cloudy area or whatever. And you very clearly get like a cutscene to introduce a boss. But even the lieutenants that you have to kind of deliver multiple death blows to were kicking my ass. That I was just like, all right, I'm done with this. This isn't yeah, this is still the same kind of frustrating. And now that it's just a faster game, I'm just dying that much more frequently. So it's one of those I'm really glad I did not commit to a 24-hour Sekiro stream of like $1 per death like I did with Bloodborne, because I probably would have lost a lot more money on on this one just because of how much faster it does play and how much quicker I die as a result of that. Because yeah, I just don't have the patience for those games. Um, and then lastly, before we dive into kind of a couple of the bigger ones that I can talk to, and we will talk to with you guys, is I really enjoyed the Witcher Netflix show, and like the biggest compliment I can give to that is, well, Henry Cavill's really good in it. I really like what he brought to the role, and it that game has made me excited to revisit The Witcher 3 in the new year, once I'm past the trying to squeeze in all of the end of year stuff. Witcher 3 I've decided is definitely a game I'm going to hop into and play kind of in the early January, February lull before all of next year's potential game of the year stuff really starts coming out. So I'm looking forward to that, because now the one of the daunting things about Witcher 3, the first time I attempted to play it, was that I just didn't understand the dropping into a third game with so much lore and history behind it. I often felt lost, and so now that now that the Witcher series has helped prep me for the political nature of the different elements, and some of the extended backstory here between Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri and stuff. I'm like, okay, that's really cool. Now I want to explore that again in game form. So yeah, I'm looking really forward to that. And then lastly, the last one I have is Uncut Gems. I went and saw that movie, and was watching so much of it through clenched teeth and basically my hands over my face and kind of looking down and stuff at Alamo, because it's a very tense piece. And Adam Sandler gives a shockingly amazing performance, and we talk a little bit about it, or we talked a little bit about it yesterday before we started recording the game list show. But he certainly has been known to give those standout performances from time to time, and it just it makes it that much more sad and depressing what he spends so much of his time creating and spitting out, that he's got this kind of talent in him, and that he squanders it to go make dumb movies about taking a family to Africa or whatever. The ongoing joke is just so many of Adam Sandler's recent movies and his comedies are basically where did he and his friends want a vacation, and they squeeze it into a film so they can write off the vacation kind of
I've
thing.
definitely heard that a lot, yeah.
And then he comes and delivers a tour de force performance here in Uncut Gems that's just phenomenal stuff, kind of throughout. So it's yeah, I definitely recommend it to anybody who's a film aficionado. For his performance alone, it's really good. And then just the way the film is shot, and how they really draw out as much tension as they possibly can from this guy who's effectively a jewelry store owner, who is just he has a significant gambling problem, and so he's dealing with loan sharks and all this stuff, and that's where so much of his tension comes from, is his self-destructive behavior in throughout the course of the movie. Just makes it all around every corner there's always a threat for him, and it's really interesting to see how Sandler plays with it and how the film itself kind of really tackles that. So definitely recommend checking that out if you are up for something like that.
Well,
But like I said,
that is definitely
it
one
was,
I was considering. Like I mentioned, today's a free day for me, and so I was looking at maybe tonight. The two I'm kind of back and forth on is either I'm gonna either check out Uncut Gems or Knives Out. One of those two.
That's
I mean,
tough.
the very different things.
Yeah, both very different, but both very, very much recommended by everybody.
Yeah. Knives Out, great. You can read the Ben Bellevue's review of it up on that nerdy site. I really enjoyed
Hey.
that one as well. So like I would honestly I would recommend both. For my personal taste, I would probably recommend Knives Out
Mhm.
over Uncut Gems. Just because like it's a more lighthearted, fun kind of story than Uncut Gems. Uncut Gems is certainly I think a much like heavier piece. So if you're in the mindset where you can go ahead and take that, cool, go and enjoy that one. Yeah, for me, Knives Out's just more of a like it's such a great character ensemble that like you can tell everybody's having a great time on the set of that one, whereas
Mhm.
like it, not that they weren't having a great time on the set of Uncut Gems, but like that's not what they showed up to work for on Uncut
Yeah.
Gems. So
Yeah.
so yeah, that would be kind of my of those two. I would sooner see Knives Out again certainly than Uncut Gems, which I said like that the way they use tension in that movie just I was constantly like watching it through like my fingers basically as a result because I'm already like I typically don't try and go to movies to like experience like tension. That's why I'm not going and seeing like horrors and thrillers very often. But
Yeah.
the buzz around Sandler's performance on this one was so high that I wanted to kind of see it for myself.
To be reminded of like Sandler did an incredible film that a lot of people didn't see called "Reign Over Me," which is
Oh, I
about,
caught that. I got that back in theaters back in the
yeah,
day.
yeah, that film is literally about Adam Sandler playing a man whose life was destroyed on 9/11, and he's become this like pseudo psychotic recluse who like it's the story of Reign Over Me is tragic and heart wrenching and gut punching and just devastating.
That's where I learned about Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Adam Sandler's character plays a video game in that game religiously called Shadow of the Colossus, which is about defeating giant things that you can't like with a magic sword, and it's very cathartic for his character, but at the same time, it's that film just like it's devastating in its impact, and Don Cheadle's in that film. Don Cheadle and Adam Sandler like duo that film, and it's just incredible. And it's I think like maybe once a decade he has to come out and show everybody that, like, he's like, yeah, by the way, this is why you let me do my movies, because every once in a while I give you a performance like this and it makes it all worth it.
Yeah, you punch your glove, Spanglish, those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw Uncut Gems at the Alamo, and the Alamo does that great thing where they kind of like have a catered
The pre-show.
like pre-show,
Yeah.
and the pre-show for this one was very heavily focused on like Adam Sandler's dramatic turns, and Reign Over Me was very much Reign Over Fire, right?
Reign Over
Was
No, it's
very
Reign Over
much,
Me.
It is Reign Over Me. Okay, sorry.
Reign of
was very
Fire
much
is a
like-
different film.
Yeah. Okay. But it was very much featured in the conversation in the video that they're kind of highlighting as like the shocking thing being like there's really like no comedy from Sandler in that. It is like a purely dramatic performance, and it can be a little unsettling if you only know him as like Opera Man or Happy Gilmore or something like that.
Yeah.
To see such a jarring take on the PTSD of like 9/11. So I've not seen it myself, but between that and you guys talking about it, definitely has me more intrigued to see if I can go out and seek it out.
I do want to say Reign of Fire is a film with Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey, and it's about dragons creating a post-apocalyptic world. So it's like that's an interesting combination of films that you gave us, Trevor.
Same kind of thing.
Yep. Another thing I wanted to say is about Knives Out is I tweeted this out after because I saw it a couple days ago. I tweeted out this. Just had a thought at Ryan Johnson. You should make more of these with Daniel Craig. Just a new series of whodunits. I don't know. I don't know. Just spitballing. But I think Benoit Blanc, who is the character Daniel Craig plays in this film, could be a modern day Hercule Poirot.
Yeah. I think he's said as much in interviews that like he likes that idea, and I feel like Ben and I had a similar conversation back when he was on the show at some point after Knives Out had come out. I think we talked about it, and he said the same kind of thing of like, yeah, I like make more Benoit Blanc mysteries. Like that'd be fun. We talked in particular.
Yeah, he's a fun character.
Yeah, I remember we talked in particular about it be like I made the comment that Knives Out is like almost a quintessentially perfect Thanksgiving movie in that like it captures all of the like familial emotions around Thanksgiving despite not taking place at Thanksgiving or any of that kind of stuff. But it's like the highs and lows of hanging out with your family around that time, or just like being around your family. And obviously that's like largely when it came out, and so it was fresh on everybody's minds. And Ben, I think, made a comment to the effect of like, yeah, I'd love to see him do like a Thanksgiving mystery with Benoit Blanc. And I was like, well, I feel like then you're just going to be comparing this against that, and I would much sooner see it be like a completely just a different like mystery that he goes out and solves that is not tied to like maybe a huge family like this or something. So you're not trying to draw those one-to-one comparisons between Knives Out and something else.
This felt very, very inspired by. I know that I saw it at the Alamo, and they had a preview thing where Ryan Johnson listed out like his favorite like whodunits, and he listed like 3 Agatha Christie based films, and it's like, okay, love this. First off, loved him before, love him even more now. Knives Out, just like, man, I just love the dude. And on top of that, there was like. I would say Knives Out is very reminiscent to me of Murder on the Orient Express with its very large cast and very diverse, and each cast member having a very specific point or motive or whatnot hidden behind who they are, and it's very, very good in that manner. I love the way he did storytelling with this film, where it didn't feel like it does something very cool towards the beginning of the film that kind of flips it on its head of what you were expecting, and then runs with the rest of it throughout the rest of the film, and it's fantastic because of that.
Yeah.
But at no point does Benoit Blanc. It's just he's incredible. He's just his donut.
He's a
metaphor.
fun character.
Yeah.
Daniel Craig's very clearly having fun with it. In the same way that I think Daniel Craig had a ton of fun with Logan Lucky when
100%.
that came out.
He sure loves his Louisiana accent. His
yeah, he
Bayou
loves
accent.
being a Southern boy.
Yeah, he sure loves it. It's very good. He's very good at it.
Yeah. So I don't think you can go wrong with either choice, Christian. But yeah, I think if you're looking for like a fun movie, Knives Out's probably your better bet. But if you're looking for like a real acting kind of like powerhouse piece, then yeah, go check out Uncut Gems. But
I've got a
both
long
of them
weekend.
get a sterling recommendation from me. So.
I have a New Year's weekend, so I'm free until January 2nd, I think. So I'll try to catch some more of these. While y'all were talking, I pulled up the Alamo app just to see like what the screen times are, and I noticed that they're still showing Parasite, which I still haven't seen. So that's
Parasite,
like the third contender. That's another one.
Parasite, like this year has been a great year for films, but Parasite just might be the best film maybe of for a long time.
Yeah, and I need to look and see if that's still playing anywhere around here. I don't think it is at any of our. Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, Parasite is just what it says about everything on every level. Like it is a very it can be a very surface level incredible movie, but if you really want to dig into it deeper, you can, and it is just it nails it on every single level. So, Parasite's incredible. I would definitely recommend actually probably seeing Parasite first, because that one's more likely to be pushed out.
This one's going through Wednesday. It's playing at the Draft House through Wednesday.
Wednesday? Okay, yeah. I would say just, I don't know, dude, maybe just take a day and see 3 films.
I'm looking at the rain check
have
when
your
they
have your
when they knock
breakfast
the
have your
drink on.
breakfast at Alamo, have your lunch at Alamo, and have your dinner at Alamo.
I did that not too long ago. Yeah, on November 30th, I did 3 Alamos shows in one day because I had like passes that I needed to use.
Nice.
Um,
Brunch, lunch,
yeah,
and dinner.
Parasite's playing at the Tempe Marketplace right near me. It's got a couple show times today, so maybe I'll go see that tonight. Uh,
I'd suggest
instead
it.
of
It's very good. It's very,
um,
very good.
it's so that's another one that like I know almost nothing about it, but like like the trailers made it feel like it's a thriller, and I'm like,
It is
it's
not.
I get like I said with like Uncut Gems, I'm like it sounds like it's one I'm gonna be watching through again, like my eyes or like looking down at the screen or whatever. But everybody that has seen it has like talked so glowingly about it that
Hmm.
that yeah, it's probably worth checking out. Um, but let's speaking of movies, let's throw it back to you, Christian. You went and saw Little Women yesterday,
Yeah, I
right?
caught that last night. Yeah.
As did I for my second time. So let's talk about Little Women a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, had you were you familiar with the story? Had you read the book or seen any of the like prior iterations of the movie?
I knew that as an IP it existed, but that is it. Like,
Yeah, pretty
I
much where
didn't.
I was. Like I knew of the Winona Ryder and Christian Bale movie from like the '90s, but I had never seen it myself.
Oh,
Um,
whoa,
I
man,
grew.
those
I
are
grew.
two good actors. I gotta check that one out.
yeah.
It's all right. It's so I am extremely familiar with Little Women. I grew up in a home with three sisters, and the oldest two who like that movie, the Christian Bale Winona Ryder movie, came out like at prime time for the teenage years of my oldest two sisters.
Hmm.
I'm very familiar with the property. I've seen the play twice. Once as a professional production, once as like a community college production. And not only that, but my oldest sister's name is Meg, and so is the oldest sister in this. So of course, like the parallels of like my sisters to this film as very much like my youngest sister is very much an Amy, my middle sister is very much a Joe, and my oldest sister is very much the Meg. I would not call myself a Beth, or nor would I call my brother a Beth. So we don't have a Beth in our family, but luckily because all of us are alive.
Yeah.
But
Well, then we don't. So it sounds like we don't need to worry about spoilers for you, and not that like something like Little Women, I think, is really drawn to spoilers. But so, what did you think, Christian? What did you think about the movie?
Oh, well, I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure what to expect. The trailer, like I had mixed feelings about the trailer, and it's a funny thing. But before I get into like my thoughts of it, when the trailer came out, a lot of comments were like, "Who asked for this? Who wants this?" Like nobody needed this. But like, I was like, I've always heard about this IP, and it's not that I don't. It's not that I was avoiding it. It's just that like out of sight, out of mind. Like and so to
Hmm.
put this story back on everybody's radars, like you'll get people like me who've never seen it again, who've never seen it to watch it for the first time is what I mean.
Hmm.
And so yeah, like I really like I can get that you have your favorite versions of a property. I'm sure a lot of people felt that way when Pride and Prejudice got remade with like Keira Knightley, and like the same thing's happening now, but like that's how I ended up falling in love with the Pride and Prejudice movie. It was like, yeah, I remade, and I really like enjoyed that story, and so that's why I was looking forward to like, oh, like I might have that same reaction watching this story for the first time, but with contemporary actors, with contemporary filmmakers, and uh, the result was yes, I really liked it.
Yeah.
Not that I wouldn't have liked those other versions. It's just that, like I said, out of sight, out of mind. And so when you do have a re-release or a remake or whatever you want to call this, like that does serve to get more people interested in either the book or if it ever is showing in Austin at like a theater, I can check that out now with.
Yeah, it's one of those IP like when I was looking at Little Women on like IMDb, there's like 5 or 6 different like film
Hmm.
versions of it over the last 80 years or whatever.
Oh wow.
It seems very much in the same way that like A Star Is Born a couple years ago.
Mm.
I remember seeing like some stuff come out of that of like, yep, it's been 20 years, so it's time for us to trot out A Star Is Born again, and you can go back and see like when that was used as like a starring vehicle for various people. And so yeah, it's interesting just how like many times that story has been like made and retold and stuff. And yeah, it's one that I probably would not have checked out, but for my love of Saoirse Ronan and Greta Gerwig, and what they did with Lady Bird, in particular, that like jumped out. So when I saw like the trailers for this, I was like, cool. I don't know that story, but I'm interested to see what this movie ends up being. It is disheartening that like the sentiment that you were seeing around was like who asked for this kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
I was reading a New York Times, I think, op-ed about the movie having like a male problem or whatever, that kind of falls in that same vein of, um, because this isn't a story about like white guys. A whole bunch of white guys are not going to see it, and in particular, in the context of the article I was reading, it seemed like a whole bunch of the white guys in the academy, or in like the voting panels
Hmm.
for awards, weren't seeing it, and they were skipping it out of like an unconscious bias of
Oh,
like, oh, that's not
that's
something I'm going
so
to see.
And
So
frustrating. Yeah.
it doesn't help that
yeah,
it's
no,
like an
absolutely.
established, well used IP either. There's no big. This is not a big revival of Little Women. It's Little Women has never gone away. So
Yeah, and it re-stoked flames for like a a piece that's been like percolating in my head for many years. But like every time the conversation comes up about like, um, uh, seeing more art, and creative works, by women or people of color, something like that, like it is, you are fighting against like white males have dominated like the art, and like the creation of art, and not catering, I don't know, the selection of like curation of art for millennia, basically. Like, and it's not like I see it often, certainly, these days in like the video game space. Anytime gamers get mad about a woman being a protagonist in a game or something like that, like the thing to keep in mind is like games are leaps and bounds ahead of the curve in terms of like the timeline of getting to those kinds of stories compared to theater and literature and art and all that stuff, like that has been so driven for centuries and centuries by like white guys in charge making the decisions and saying this is what we're going to say is art. The fact that, we are seeing like a renaissance of other voices getting to make those pieces is great, and I absolutely want to see more of that. Speaking as a white guy, I want to experience those other stories because, as I so often have seen in like theater, getting to experience those other things has made me a more empathetic person, and being able to put myself in the shoes of other experiences that I certainly would not live.
Mm.
Um, I appreciate getting those opportunities more. That said, I certainly see movies come by and be like, "That's probably not for me." That like would absolutely speak to that, but just, so there's still an unconscious bias where, like I said, I have not seen the prior iterations of Little Women, and I remember that being like required reading for like an option in
Hmm.
school growing up, of like, hey, you can read like 3 or 4 books, or you have to read 4 of these books, and they'd give you like a list of 20. And
Yeah.
I probably read the Three Musketeers instead of Little Women
Hmm.
because I was like, ooh, guys with sword fighting. That was the direction that 10-year-old Trevor wanted to go or whatever. So it is. I have having seen this myself, now twice, like I have a even more, newfound appreciation for the the fact that Greta Gerwig is using her clout from Lady Bird, I would say, to try and tell this story, um, and I think she does a phenomenal job with it.
Yeah, I was like from the get go with the trailers, I was looking forward to this. Like you were talking about how some movies like you can kind of get a feel like it's not maybe for you or it wouldn't appeal to you, but like I'm a this is gonna be weird. I'm a big fan. I've not seen a lot of period pieces, but every time I do see one, I'm always a big fan of. So it's always weird saying like I'm a big fan of period piece movies when I there's still so many that I have not seen. So that's my little asterisk when I do say that. But when I saw like, oh, there's this title I've always heard of, Little Women, and it's a period piece movie, and it's got like some strong actors. Am I saying it right? Laura Dern.
Laura Dern, yeah, she plays Marmee.
Laura Dern, you got Emma Watson, Chris Cooper. Um, obviously Saoirse Ronan. I get her name wrong too. But just like I could tell, like okay, cool, we got a cool story, strong performers, and I finally in the trailer saw what the premise is that it's about this. I'm probably I'm sorry if I'm not wording it well, but like it's a family and they all have different aspirations. One wants to be, and they're all, artists in their own way. And I was like, okay, I could totally relate to this. This is about like struggling as a writer, as a creator, not only like as far as like what your families expect of you, but what you want and how the industry might not be receptive of you. I was like, this is like, yes, this is just the perfect combination of everything that like I would want in a movie. And so I was looking forward to that, and it totally delivered on so many of those fronts. And really, like, just as general impressions, it was that I really liked it, and I'm looking forward to finally checking out like the older versions of it, and maybe even seeing it on the stage.
Yeah, it's I really enjoyed it. In particular for me, Saoirse Ronan and Florence Pugh, who plays Amy, that's Joe and
Oh my gosh, I
Amy,
didn't know her name. That's the
respectively.
first time I ever seen her, but yeah, she kind of stole the show for me.
Yeah, she was really good. She's one that I wanted to see. She did Cameron, if you recognize the name, she was
Oh
Paige
yeah,
in the Paige
yes, she was.
biopic
Okay, that's where I recognized her.
earlier in the year. And like I was like that was one I wanted to get around to seeing and just never did. But seeing her in this, like I was like, oh, she blew me away. And one of the criticisms I've seen when I was reading after seeing it the first time and like reading about other versions of the show, one of the criticism I would see was like a lot of times people just hated Amy as a character, and they get frustrated by her because she's a little more impetuous and
Well,
impulsive.
she's the
Kind of,
baby.
especially yeah, she's the baby of the group. Actually, I don't know if she's younger than
She
Beth
is.
or not.
Amy.
But
Amy is always
she?
the youngest.
She is. Amy is the youngest.
But
Okay.
the thing is, her immaturity, especially in the face of Beth's health, is a very big frustrating point for both Meg and Joe, and is like a
Yeah.
driving point between between the two oldest and the youngest in that case. And
Gotcha.
Beth is the peacemaker. She is the one that brings all four of them together and gets them to overcome any of their differences. Beth,
Yeah.
despite her illness, is emotionally like one of the strongest characters in that book. So, needless to say, I've also read the book a couple of times. I love Little Women. I
Yeah.
do. I haven't seen the film yet, but I love the franchise. I love the original work. I just think it's a beautiful telling of a very intimate story in late 1800s America. So
Yeah. That was one of the things that stood out to me, and having like looked at the '94 version since seeing this, is like all of the actresses in this version play the characters in their younger years, and in the quote unquote present day of like when the thrust of the so that yeah, they play around with the timeline in this version, versus in the 1994 one. There were like two actresses that played Amy's character. There's like I think Kirsten Dunst plays as like the young version of her, and then Samantha Mathis think plays like the older version of her. And so I think that's going to also affect your viewing of that character, I'm sure. I'll be very curious to see or to discuss the movie with you after you've seen it, Cameron, given like all the stuff that you're bringing to the table of your history with the story and your affinity for it, to see kind of what you think of this interpretation of it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I saw it a second time with a friend of mine last night who, when we grabbed some food afterwards, she was like, I think it's like when I asked her as we were walking at the theater, she's like, I'm thinking so many things right now. I need to process a little bit more. And then as we sat down over some food and stuff, she was like, I think it might be one of my favorite movies ever. And I was like, that's really cool. I'm very glad because it was one that like it wasn't even really on her radar to go see it. I think she said she'd maybe seen the trailer once or twice and was just like, I don't really need to see that. But when I like reached out to her, she wanted to go check it out, because I was like, I think my friend Marissa would like this. She was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so she hadn't seen Lady Bird. She didn't really know what to expect going into it. I think I think she was blown away. That was really cool too. She was very much like seeing herself in some of the characters, and I was like, yeah, I can. That's
yeah.
another reason I recommended this to you, is because I very much see her as like a Joe type of character as well.
What's super interesting is that even as a male, you can see yourself in a lot of the male side characters. When I was younger, I definitely felt more like a Rory, and then as I got older, I definitely found myself feeling more like a and to this day, I feel more like a Frederick. Like for people who aren't familiar with the story, Rory is their childhood neighbor who is just like best friends for life with Joe. But Joe and Rory are just the best of friends, and that comes to a head as they reach adulthood. And then you have Frederick, who is Joe's adult friend, or sorry, in Joe's adult life, not just like he's friends with a little kid, but they live in the same boarding house, and he is a literary professor from Germany, and so he's working as a tutor in America, and they kind of just like hang out, and he like critiques her work, and he just does a great job, and he's I don't know how it is in this film, but in regular ones, Joe is making her living by writing these sensational stories for a magazine, and he's constantly telling her like, you need to write something for yourself, like from your own perspective. He's like, you're writing these stuff and it's fine, but like your real potential, like I've seen your real writing, like your real potential is in the story that you want to write. Like you need to write it, and it'll be, and like it's that's how he is in like the regular stuff. Although he points out plenty of times that like my favorite thing is he always tells her the realistic, like it's not realistic, but the literary points of like historically in literature how women's stories end, where they end with the woman getting married. Like that's how these stories end.
Yeah, that point is made by the publisher character in this movie that she's working for. He basically and you can see that in the trailer. Like he repeatedly says like, okay, if your main character is a girl, she has to either end up married or dead by the end of it. And that's like Joe struggles with that, I think. Yeah, like I said, I think you'll really enjoy it, Cameron. So when you go see it, like let's like sit down and talk about it,
Yes,
either on the
100%.
show or just like over lunch or something.
Let's do it. I'm really excited to see it. After hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, okay. Like my mom went to go see it on Christmas Day with my with a bunch of members of my family. I wasn't able to go because I had plans. Because normally we don't do stuff on Christmas Day. We're like a Christmas Eve family, and so they're like, yeah, we're all going to do stuff on Christmas Day. It's like, cool. I did not know this. I have plans. And then like later, like late that night, I went to see Knives Out. But no, it's like my mom. Like I said, this film is very much like a very impactful film for my family. It's very core. It's like it is one of the Abbott family stories that gets rewatched and told and whatnot. To the point where like I'm very excited. Like my middle sister, who was out of town when my older sister and mom went to go see it, was a little miffed because she's like, we should have all gone to see it together, and so now they're all going to go see it together. So
nice.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I'm excited.
Some more thoughts on it. Yeah, I really enjoy the performances. Like, I really enjoy the writing as well. I think all the characters are just really entertaining.
Yeah.
But the one character that, just to kind of talk on the negative a little bit, and Laurie is the character that I have the biggest problem with.
Yeah.
And he's the one, like, from character aside, what I mean is that he's the one that felt the most contemporary as far as performances go. Like, I get that you are updating this for the modern audiences, but I did feel like in most of his scenes, towards the beginning, it gets toned down towards the end, I think, anyways, but for the beginning half of the movie, I felt like he was, like, literally plucked from another movie. Like, that he just come from Perks of Being a Wallflower or Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, or something like that, and just accidentally fell into the wardrobe of a period movie.
I think so that's a big part of Rory's character, is that the reason why he and Joe are such good friends is because they're both characters who are very much like non-typical for their time. The idea of like a character from like Perks of Being the Wallflower is like, that is very much like a real thing of young men in that time period.
And
yeah,
I get that,
it's jarring,
but
it's jarring.
So kind of how you said, like, that's why him and Joe work so well together. But the way Joe does it, like, it still feels like I'm not. It doesn't take me out of it when she does something out of the ordinary or something different. Like, whereas his, it's just so out. I don't know. It just for me it just sticks out.
It
a bit
might
more.
be his performance,
Which might be the intention. Like I said, like this just means I need to go check out other iterations and maybe even read the book or check out on stage. But like it was the only thing that really took me out of the movie was was most of his scenes in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I want to see it now because I just realized it's Timothy Chalamet, and
yeah,
that is very like that's possible. I saw him in The King. Which he was fantastic in, but there's a couple of scenes where I think I can see that happening. So I'm very interested to see how he performs as Rory in those early scenes then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised. Actually, I'm gonna take a pause and let you guys talk about it some more.
I was just gonna say, like one of the things, I feel like I probably knew Chris Cooper was in this movie because I feel like I saw his name in the trailer at some point and was like, oh yeah, Chris Cooper. I always like seeing Chris Cooper when he pops up on screen, and like he's just one of those steadfast, like he's good in everything he does. And most recently, I saw him in Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and so like that performance put up against this one, I'm like, he just had a really good year. He was in a couple of my favorite movies this year.
He's always so great, though. Chris Cooper's just a fantastic
as like
actor.
Wildly different characters, and yeah, in this, like so I was thinking about it, watching it a second time, and I might write up like a formal review for the site. And the thing I was thinking about that is basically like what the my would-be review will like center around is, I love that this movie is about kindnesses, like the March family, is very charitable by nature, largely driven by Marmee, Laura Dern's character. There's a scene very early on in the movie where like they're all sitting down for Christmas breakfast, and she comes back and says, "My girls, there's somebody wanting down not far from here. Their family, 5 children to a bed just to stay warm. Would you mind terribly if we gave them our Christmas breakfast?" And the girls are all like, like they, in the lead up to this, they were already lamenting that they're not getting Christmas presents and stuff because they're like their family is trying to do their part for the country and all that stuff because this is Civil War era, and so like that act of kindness begets another act of kindness where like Chris Cooper's like the rich neighbor, the father of Laurie, kind of. Basically, like they return and they've got an even larger feast that he has provided for them, and there's just so many moments, like kindness is great and small throughout this movie, that it was just very heartwarming, and I think one of the central conceits of the movie is built around that, is like, hey, good things happen when people are kind to one another.
Charity and kindness are the driving points of the March family. Because not only do they provide it, they are also able to survive because of it.
Yeah.
It's such a great story. So you said he played his father, not his grandfather?
Or grandfather.
His grandfather.
Sorry.
Okay.
My apologies.
I'm like, if that's a minor change, that could totally work. But normally he's his grandfather, which is totally cool.
Yep. No. Grandfather. The father died. And they make a big point of his daughter died, when she was young, and so one of the daughters becomes like a surrogate daughter to him, kind of thing, and that helps ingratiate the two families together as well. But yeah, that was just me misspeaking. Sorry. But yeah, like Chris Cooper, really great in this movie, and he was just like another delightful surprise to see him pop up. There's also one character I was like, oh, I was not expecting you, actor, in this movie, but I don't want to like spoil that because it's just it's an interesting enough moment in and of itself. But it was just like, oh, that took me out for a second, but okay, I'm back in now.
I don't think I noticed. Like I said, you don't want to spoil, but like maybe you could say.
I'll mention it to you
after, in the present or in the past, or okay,
yeah. I'll mention it after the show.
Okay, cool. Okay.
But yeah, it was just like. And it's not even like the character, it's just like the actor that they have for that role. I was like, oh, this is not the type of movie I would normally expect to see you in.
Oh, looking forward to hearing that. I was gonna just say like I was just like I was so caught off guard that they got me to care about like so many of the characters. Usually, like I went in thinking like, oh, it's just gonna be Joe. Joe is gonna be the focal point, and that she's the only kind of like stand. Like again, I had no experience with the story at all, and so just from the trailer, I thought it was like I saw that the other sisters had interest in stuff, but I thought we wouldn't get to see their journeys or their arcs like in, uh, you know,
Yeah,
what they want.
You were expecting
what
this
they
to
get.
be like a Saoirse Ronan movie instead of a more ensemble piece.
Yeah, yeah. Like for example, in Lady Bird, we do see her friend, and we do get a sense of like what the friends want and what they get out of life. But like we really, but I was surprised at just how much I got invested in so many of the characters, even outside of their family, and I really enjoyed that a lot, and which made it so like once I started noticing again, I didn't realize that we'd be doing this time back and forth, and when I realized like how different things are for just Joe, and then once we started moving from the other characters and seeing like just how different things are, I was like, oh no, this is gonna hurt to watch. Like I'm so invested, and now that I see that things are not going quite so well, like
Yeah,
darn
yeah.
it.
I'm curious because I haven't because Cameron, you're the first person I've talked to about the movie who has read the source material and stuff. Is in the novel, is it told more chronologically, or does it play around with like
This is the first
time?
time. This is the first time that the story has been told out of chronological order.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't know that.
it's not even like the way I looked at it, and the first time I saw it, it was a little jarring. But like I was able, like I've seen enough film and followed enough that I was able to understand, the time jumps and where we were in the arc of their larger stories. But I definitely walked out and somebody was like, I didn't know what was going on. Some other guy that was there with his girlfriend or whatever. But the second time watching it, I looked at it more as the timeline of the story is the movie starts and Joe's already in New York, and kind of like that's the point of the story that like we're being told is like the present day and moving forward. And then as we go through Joe's story, she's like reflecting back on earlier moments in her life, and those tend to play out more chronologically in that timeline as well. So you have like New York era Joe going back 7 years earlier, and then we start seeing like the girls growing up as well, and it kind of bounces back and forth based off of like a moment that happens to Joe, in the New York era timeline, and then like that will spark a memory that we go back and see kind of the parallel from like her earlier youth, and you kind of bounce back and forth between those time periods. And it's I think it thematically like linking like pretty much every one of those moments links back to there's like a pairing of every moment that links together nicely, symbolically or thematically or just like direct parallels between the two periods. But it was like that's one of the things I think that is most ambitious in terms of the film's like approach to this story, is that it decided to not tell this as a chronological tale. So like right from the off, you are introduced to what happens to Joe and Laurie's like the end of their story, so to speak, because we're seeing Amy talk about it in the present day, so that like when you see that played out throughout the course of the movie, you kind of know where this is going. So it's an interesting approach to the.
I heard this is what Greta Gerwig was doing, and that's one of the reasons why I was so interested in how it was going to play out, because otherwise it's just a fantastic telling of a story, with a fantastic cast. But what I will let you know is that in the original source material and the way that it's done, it's chronological order, but it is broken up into two parts. So
that was one of the things I saw, is that like was it Little Women and then the sequel, right?
So there's Little Women, which is split into two parts.
Okay.
It was published separately in the United Kingdom, I believe, if I recall correctly.
Okay, that's what I was seeing.
Because they broke it up in half, because otherwise it was too long for British publications. because British people were still at that point in time still doing serials, and it's just the different ways we consume media to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have that argument now with binging versus weekly releases on streaming and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
But what I will say is that it is separated into two distinct parts, where you do see that the themes of part one carry forward very strongly in a kind of order in the same way in part two. It is it is very parallel to each other in those two parts, but it is just I'm very excited to see, because Greta Gerwig, I think, is a brilliant director, and so her directing and editing it deliberately to be this way of how to tell the story differently this time, because I don't think it has to be done in a tasteful way that is different. Otherwise, you are just remaking a film. You're not giving us something new. And I don't think that's something Greta Gerwig could possibly stand, is just to remake something that somebody else made. She is such a driven, independent director that for her to take... I'm super curious to see her interpretation of how to do this story in a way that's different than anybody else has done. And it also creates it so it's a way you could only see it in film versus... Because normally I would say actually my preferred method of seeing of Little Women is the actual play production. Because I think that there's a lot of these strong moments in the source material and in the play that are very much would be very difficult to kind of capture on film, because it would be it would be too boring for the majority of people who go to see a film. But if you are engaged in an audience, especially a small audience like I was in both times, it feels like you're part of this. You're watching this very intimate story. And so I'm very curious to see how Greta Gerwig as a director approaches that difficulty with the source material. And at the same time tells a flowing story with this bouncing back and forth. Because I read that in an article that she was doing that. I'm like, that's brilliant. I can't wait to see what she does with it. But
Well, coming from someone who was watching or experiencing the story for the first time, I really enjoyed the time jumping, and I thought it was done so well. I was under the assumption that that's how you experience the story. When y'all were talking about that there's been depictions in the past of an older and younger versions of the characters, I just assumed it was the same thing, like time jumping. I didn't realize that it was told chronologically.
there's a time skip.
I thought it was done really well. Well, what I mean is back and forth.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
But where was I going with that? And I think the editing helped the time jumping a lot. But I was really impressed at how well they used the environments and the clothing and the makeup and everything for me, to tell the audience very clearly when we are in time. I thought they did a really good job.
Yeah, there's some very obviously very obvious cues in terms of somebody cuts their hair or whatever, and so okay, now I'm looking at the past kind of thing in certain moments. But I also thought in addition to kind of the design elements that really help tell that story effectively, all the actors have I think they do a very good job of this is young Amy and her attitude to life and the world around her compared to older, more mature Amy. I think again, Florence Pugh really does a great job kind of helping clearly set those two characters and that character at two different points in her life apart, so that you can very easily, even if you're not looking at what's on screen, you're hearing how the performers are talking and all that stuff, and it's okay, I know that we're back in the the past or whatever. So in fact, Cameron, when you go see it, if you want a movie buddy, I would gladly go see this again and then just shoot the shit with you about it afterwards. So let me know.
That sounds like a plan. Yeah, 100%. I would be down for that. It's I feel bad because some people are like, "Hey, I came here to hear about nerdy stuff. I didn't come here for a Little Women spoiler cast."
Man, this is the original nerd content right here, man.
It really is. This is for sure, old school nerd.
Yeah, and that's this is I was thinking about that too as I'm looking at the time and being oh, we've spent half an hour talking about Little Women. That's very much gonna be the title of this episode probably in and the fact that three guys talking about Little Women I think speaks to the like the New York Times article I alluded to earlier. Like, yes, like on a wider scale, there certainly is issues of like guys looking at this and being like, no, I'm gonna go see Star Wars again, of course, because that's a guy story. Versus Little Women is kind of like, oh, the girl story that you like that people see or whatever. And I'm I love this, and it's probably going to be near the top of my list for movies of the year. And I love that I got to experience that, even if I am a guy or whatever, because it's just a very well told story, regardless of what gender the protagonists or your core characters are. Very well done. So I like that three guys can sit around and talk about this in this way to the extent that we have. But speaking of guy stories, let's go ahead and switch it over to the other thing we can, I think, all speak to in The Mandalorian, which is wrapped up. And we'll go ahead. I'll put the caveat out here right now that we'll probably potentially dive into spoilers now that the whole series is out. And yes. I think some of the most interesting stuff to discuss comes from like the real end of the final episode here. So I'll go ahead and put a timestamp for wherever this is in the show that we will potentially delve into spoilers. So if you haven't caught up on Mandalorian yet, go do it. It's out on Disney Plus, all 8 episodes now.
If you haven't been like, oh, I don't know about seeing it, watch it. It's such a great. I realized this last night while I was talking to my brother-in-law. I was like, man, when I was a kid, all I wanted to do was read more about Jedi. As an adult, all I want to see is more people who are like Force users or like special people in this universe, because this universe is so great for telling stories that are so different than what you would expect from the films.
Yeah, and that's really what I mean, we don't have to get too far into the movies, but my 5-second thing I'll just say is like that is what I wanted most from the sequel trilogy, was more about everyday people embracing the Force, and that's all I'll say about that.
I think especially with Disney Plus, I think The Mandalorian opens the door for far more of those kinds of stories. Whereas like movies, I think, are going to have like an expectation of you want a big grandiose story. And I would say like Rogue One and Solo are like the two ends of the spectrum where not focusing on the Jedi and lightsaber duels and the cool science fiction-y things that help set Star Wars apart. You have, in my opinion, I thought Rogue One was a really good story that doesn't focus on any real Force users. And then you have Solo, that is less so a good story, not focusing on Force users. But I think Solo was also hampered by a whole bunch of other issues, unrelated. I think it could have been an interesting story, not focused on those. But still, like both of those, even Disney/Lucasfilm themselves identified and said, hey, these are not part of like the main saga of movies we're trying to tell. So we're gonna set them aside in their own other category. Whereas I think in the longer form version of like Disney Plus shows, you can tell, potentially movie or monster of the week stories like Mandalorian here. But I think you can also, and we've seen it maybe in the past with like Clone Wars or Rebels, you can tell stories that aren't all about the Jedi, and you'd get a little bit more slice of life kind of moments for some of these characters. So I'm very much, I like the era that we're in, despite its faults, because it opens the door to more avenues of storytelling and more opportunities for telling stories in this galaxy far, far away. Like The Mandalorian, which I really enjoyed.
I think people would have been more hot for Solo if it had been told like The Mandalorian, in like this broken, like give it a bit more stress to it. I think part of the reason why Solo, like the things I love about Solo are that it's not afraid to bring in these other side characters. But I feel like there is the thing is, I love Solo, I think a lot more than a lot of other people love Solo or even like it. I'm a big proponent. Like, is it a critically important story that needed to be told? No, but it was a fun story to fill in some colors. And did it have some dumb stuff in it? Sure, but you know.
Oh, I mentioned when I went and did that wannabe film class, we did like a quick, brief tangent over into Star Wars land, and I mentioned my that I think my hottest Star Wars take is that I think Alden Ehrenreich does more with the character of Han Solo in that one movie in terms of like a range of showing off what that character can be than Harrison Ford does over the course of the four movies that he's featured in. Um, he's like Harrison Ford is pretty much always playing like one note smarmy smuggler guy with a heart of gold kind of thing. And I think in Solo we get to see um, Alden Ehrenreich dealing with like hopes and desires and loss and fears and stuff in a way that we don't see Harrison Ford, because I don't think that was the focal point of the original trilogy or Force Awakens.
You saying that makes me actually kind of want to watch it again. I've not watched it since the theatrical release, and you mentioning that, I think I should sit down with it.
I suggest it. It's I also want to say is that I think that there is a very, like you said, he's playing a totally different Han Solo, because this is a Han Solo who isn't the confident smuggler. He's playing this guy, this one character over the course of like a good chunk of his life, and a massive multiple times transitional period of his life. And so yeah, it is different. It is going to be very different. He is not going to be the cool hand Han that you expect to see in Episode 4, and it kind of builds up towards that throughout the film. I think that another thing is that I think that Kathleen Kennedy is like, we know from reports and stuff that Kathleen Kennedy wanted to give Ron Howard 4 more months to work on this film, because of the transition between directors. And Kathleen Kennedy went to Bob Iger and said, "Hey, I need 4 more months to make this movie great." And Bob Iger said, "No, put it out." Like, because by that point, The Last Jedi had come out. They needed something, and it's like it suffered because of, I think, combination of like where it was at in the schedule for release. I think it suffered the fact that like it couldn't be moved back.
Yeah, I mean, it always feels like the Ant-Man gone wrong. Like Ant-Man went through a lot of the same kinds of like behind the scenes changeover and stuff.
Oh, right, with
but,
Edgar Wright and all that.
Yeah, but ended up being like a good movie that fit within the MCU mold, kind of in the end product. And a lot of that was you can definitely still see moments of Edgar Wright versus Peyton Reed in the original Ant-Man, versus like Solo, which went through a lot of the same stuff, and I feel like didn't right the ship as much. And I don't know if an extra 4 months would have done that, but both of them come from like the initial like Disney saying, "Hey, we don't believe in the vision that like we signed these people on for enough to follow through with it," which I think like with the now influx of Taika Waititi in arguably both, because he directed this last episode of Mandalorian, like Disney seems to have lightened up on that, because Taika is certainly out there in the same kind of like weird ballpark that Edgar Wright or Miller and Lord were for Solo.
Which makes me think that Miller and Lord's vision for Solo ended up, like, in production-wise, ended up being very different than what it was possibly originally going to be.
I mean, the stories that I feel like I've heard are, because Kasdan wrote the story for Solo, wrote.
Oh, and he had a
the
massive problem
screenplay,
with like what
and, and he did not, like the stories I've heard are that he was very much against Miller and Lord, and Miller and Lord, to try and like appease Kasdan, like would film what he recorded, or what like what he wrote in the screenplay, but then they would play and riff with the actors and play around with that. And Kasdan basically like fought that and thought, was it the last things I'd heard were Kasdan didn't think they were getting enough coverage of like the scripted versions of the shows of the film, so that like a lot of that stuff would get lost on the edit because there just wouldn't have been enough options for it. And so that seemed to be a driving force between like whose side they go with in the making of that film. But anyway, Solo,
That's the
divergent.
Mandalorian.
Mandalorian, yeah.
Back to the point of Mandalorian.
Back over to Mandalorian. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the Mandalorian pretty much all the way through.
Same.
Like I know a
Same.
lot of people kind of like maligned, the middle few episodes as
No,
like
they're awesome.
filler
I love
episodes
them.
or something like that. But I thought they were fun, and like explored other areas of this, post Return of the Jedi world. Um, I I I wish that like some of the decisions they made were more explained, especially in like contrast to other established canon, especially now that like the ending with the Darksaber
Mm.
absolutely is like tying this story to Clone Wars and Rebels. Like
Which makes
I'm
sense because
curious why
Dave Filoni's the co-creator of The Mandalorian.
exactly, yeah. So I'm curious why this sect of Mandalorians are so like beholden to the idea of not taking off the helmet, whereas like in Rebels we see Sabine with her helmet off all the frickin' time, and we see
Hmm.
other Mandalorians in like her clan and stuff without their helmet. So I'm curious why like this clan is so why Favreau made the decision and Filoni like backed it up, I guess, to say like no, he can't take his helmet off and not really explore why he can't take his helmet off when we've seen other people clearly can. Um,
Well, we know why. This is the way.
sure, yes. So yeah, that's like those are some of my few nitpicks are kind of where this seems to work in opposition to established canon and lore and stuff. But overall, I still had a great time with the show, and I think everybody kind of showed up to play and had some solid performances, and I definitely thought it nailed the Western
Hmm.
samurai vibe that it was going for in most of the episodes, and yeah, I had a great time enjoying the show. So what did everybody else think?
I
Yeah,
went.
go
Oh, go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
Cam.
Christian, you go ahead. I talked a lot about Solo. Go for it.
I think I appropriately set my expectations. Not, and that sounds probably worse than I mean for it. What I mean by that is that I'm familiar with Filoni's tone. I've seen at least a good chunk of Clone Wars. Admittedly, not all of it, but now since we're not getting a Star Wars movie for a while, I got plenty of time to catch up on it. But I watched all of Rebels, and I really like his balance of lore centric, but also like comedic, slice of life. Like I think he has a really good balance of all that, and so I knew, or and I walked into this feeling that I would get something similar, just live action and a bit more compact. Not like I think a lot of people were expecting this to be Star Wars Breaking Bad, Star Wars Game of Thrones, like a bit more heady, like a movie, but like that's my perspective just from some of the tweets that I've seen, and then
Mm-hmm.
like we're all here, we're all fans of Kind of Funny. I don't know if y'all been catching up with the in review, but
Yep.
that's kind of the feel I get, especially from Nick, for example. Which I'm not gonna stay on this for too long because there's people out there who probably don't even know who I'm talking about. But in general, the what I've heard a lot though is that yeah, people had different expectations, but I really enjoyed this because I think I went in. I think part of what helped me enjoy it so much was that I knew it was going to be kind of like a fun we're gonna have fun just in Star Wars land. We're gonna have a fun adventure, and it's gonna be lighthearted. It's gonna be cool, and it's gonna be wild.
Yeah. And if nothing else, it gave us Baby Yoda, which is
The
the greatest
greatest
gift
thing.
of
Hey, I
2019.
still gotta look this up. I still gotta verify this, but I heard that Donald Glover is the reason why that was held out of the marketing. That's why there
Yeah.
weren't a lot of toys ready and stuff. And I was like, what?
Yeah,
I gotta check that
Wait,
out.
Donald Glover. I thought it was John Favreau.
No, so I read an article to that effect. While they were working on Lion King, Donald Glover and Jon Favreau talked about it, and specifically Donald Glover made a mention of, when Beyonce drops an album as a surprise, like that dominates the culture and the conversation, and so like the surprise factor of Baby Yoda was like he Favreau kind of refers back to that conversation with Donald Glover about Beyonce for making the push to not
Oh,
include it in any of the pre-release marketing for the movie was like
to the point
a
it's not even in merch. They kept it from merch.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, which and I also saw an article or I've seen a few articles going around estimating like the amount of money that Disney lost by not having the child merch ready to go for the holiday season, which I think that is a misstep. I think they could have, managed to like do enough of that hopefully it wouldn't have leaked.
Well, this is the problem: is that the partner that they use for production of Star Wars toys and stuff like and merch is Hasbro, and Hasbro is notorious for leaking things early. Like Hasbro has way too many leaks in its corporate structure, where like anytime there's going to be something new with Star Wars, people who are actually looking for spoilers keep an eye on Hasbro stuff, because the stuff that gets leaked from Hasbro. Because what happens is Hasbro sends out months upon months upon months ahead of time promotional stuff to stores to like say, hey, you want to buy our stuff and stock it.
And we see that like I wouldn't say Star Wars is like exclusive to that. Like that's where a lot of like the leaks of like even Marvel movies and stuff would be like that's where all the plot threads get started, because somebody sees like, hey, here's a toy that they're releasing. So what does it mean for all these characters? And they start doing that speculation. So like I get the rationale behind it, but I would have liked to have seen a world where I could have gotten my sister a Baby Yoda plush for Christmas, because she's really enjoying The Mandalorian as well, and in particular she has joined specific Facebook groups dedicated solely to Baby Yoda memes and stuff, and I'm like, cool.
Same.
I feel like I'm seeing most of those memes anyway without being in a dedicated group, but yeah, she's enjoying that, and she's only like as of Christmas when we last spoke, she was only like 3 episodes in still, but she was still like enamored by Baby Yoda. So would have been really cool if that had been something that we could all have to enjoy these days and not have to wait until March or May, but. So be it.
To my point, I would say, because I'm currently in my hands holding right now a Baby Yoda yarn ornament, go to Etsy. There are some incredibly independent creators who are making wonderful things with Baby Yoda, and it's for reasonable pricing. You can get little things about Baby Yoda. Now, are they official Disney merchandise? No. But I think Disney made a bold choice, and I agree with their choice, to keep Baby Yoda a secret. Because Baby Yoda is precious, and he must be protected at all times, even from the public.
Yeah, and they speaking of Mandalorian, bringing it back to that and the last episode, like they knew how to make you like immediately hate these 2 stormtroopers.
Oh my gosh!
as soon as they start punching Baby Yoda in the bag, everybody's like, these guys need to die right now.
I felt a disturbance
I want to see them
in the
die
force
in the
when
most
that happened.
painful way possible.
Oh my gosh! Did you guys? One of those guys is Jason Sudeikis.
Yeah, Jason Sudeikis and Adam Pally were the 2 stormtroopers. And I didn't catch that. Like, watching the scene, I didn't place either of them, and I didn't see it until like after the fact in recaps and whatnot. But yeah, I thought that like both of those are great choices as wonderful comedic actors to play to play that moment out and just have this weird, and this goes back to your conversation of like, hey, it's a weird little slice of life for a couple scout troopers. Like we get to just see them shooting the shit on their speeder bikes, trying to shoot a can on the side of the road, and the implication there being that like, oh, the reason they're bad shots is because their guns are shit. It's like, okay,
well, they're
cool.
bad shots, but also like you can see like they have struggle aiming in their helmets.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna say this on the whole stormtroopers can't shoot. Like, I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying that I went most of my life never giving it a second thought. Mm-hmm. Like for me, it's just they're not. Why didn't they get shot? Well, because of plot armor. They're the main characters, so it would have really sucked if they died in the first 15 minutes. And so I get that it's fun to poke fun at the stormtroopers and they can't shoot. And there's even that guy that's like, he was a sniper in the Empire.
He was a sharpshooter.
Yeah.
He's like an imperial sharp.
He was like, I'm not a
stormtrooper. Shut up. Yeah.
I'm not. Wasn't a stormtrooper. You ass. It's
like I can still laugh with it, but at the same time, at the back of my head, I'm like, I mean, they didn't hit the mark because that's just how the story goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And and there's a great defense out there that I didn't think about until I really saw this argument. In New
Hope, right?
In New Hope, they're trying to miss. Yep. Like that is the argument. Like they have
a tracker on the Millennium Falcon.
They've got a tracker on the Falcon. They're trying to let these people go. So like they're not bad shots in that. So much as like they've been instructed to let these people go, it loses its weight in future movies when they basically don't ever get shot because of plot armor stuff. And I think it's mostly like pointed out as tongue in cheek, but also as a result of just the amount of blaster bolts that are being shot around. It's like how do you shoot that many times and not hit the things that you're aiming for?
Yeah.
Just have less shots, and you don't see, like, in the same way that like the henchmen of every Bond movie or every every Fast and Furious movie these days are terrible shots. Like it's an expected thing, but stormtroopers, because it's blasters and laser bolts and stuff, and then you also have like the argument of like what do the stormtrooper armor even do if like a blaster bolt from a rebel does just as good a job taking them out as if they weren't wearing the armor at all or whatever. But anyway,
the lightest of spoilers about Clone Wars. What I meant was that like in the Clone Wars series, there's a slight mention of like, man, like we're pumping up so many clone troopers that they don't have time to train. Like we're rushing them through boot camp, and so
by
like,
this time,
that's what I meant. But which again, we don't have to spend much time on it. It's just that it's just funny to me that we have to keep mentioning it so many times.
Yeah,
but,
there's a great Rebels episode too where some of the the stormtroopers from the Clone Wars that didn't follow through with the Purge and Order 66 and stuff, they have such disdain for the stormtroopers and specifically like stormtrooper armor that I love. They're like, it's like, man, this armor doesn't do anything. This doesn't protect anything. Not like our Clone Wars clone trooper armor. Like this stormtrooper stuff is cheap and poorly made. And it's like I appreciate that they have even in like universe and in canon, there's like disdain or distinctions made between the clone armor and the stormtrooper armor. But yeah, Mandalorian. I like the when I first watched the last episode, I loved that opening sequence. Actually, the first time I watched it, I was like, I don't know if I like this the extended, just the length of how long the stormtrooper sequence goes.
I give you that. Yeah, it was a few seconds.
But then realizing that it was like Taika, basically.
Yeah, that's the same.
Like playing around with it, I was like, okay, like that. Now it certainly makes more sense, and on a second watch, I enjoyed it more. Like knowing kind of where the end story goes and all that stuff. But the thing that really stood out for me in that last episode was kind of that final shot of Moff Gideon. Like as soon as it zoomed in on like the TIE fighter crash and stuff, I was like, oh, he's gonna bust out of here. Does he have a lightsaber?
Yeah.
Does he? And then like the dark saber breaks through. I was like,
oh
shit! It's not even a light. It's the dark saber.
Yeah,
that's really cool. And immediately, like in my head, I'm like, okay, where did we last see that? Where did it end up in Rebels? Who did it end up with? Like, what does that mean for like the timeline of between Rebels and where we are here? And the fact that like Giancarlo Esposito has it is just like exciting beyond belief. And like I was already like,
but also
when they zoom in the TIE fighter, I'm like, good, he's not dead. Like I figured he wasn't dead because they have him crash, off screen or whatever. So he's probably safe and fine and good. I want him back because he's such a great talent. But the fact that like he's got the dark saber on top of that, I'm just like, oh, now I am amped up to 11 to see where this guy, where we go from here. How they explore, if they explain any kind of like backstory of how he acquired it and all that stuff.
I think it makes sense because he said that he was so during the Empire's reign there was a secret police force and it's clear Moff Gideon was a part of it. Yeah. To the point where like he even knew Jin's name. His like it's and he was the officer assigned to the Purge of Mandalore. Or also known as the Great Purge, where the Empire did everything they could to wipe out all of Mandalorian culture and society. And so I'm not surprised that he has it because that's actually a super typical Moff thing to do, which is a lot of Moffs love to, on the worlds that they've subjugated for the Empire, keep trophies. Moffs who are in charge of Kashyyyk are known to like stuff Wookiees. Like it's a very real Moff thing to do, but on top of that, I loved Moff Gideon because it's at the beginning of this episode. He shows up at the end of last episode. He's like, oh, he's super cool. He has like these He has the Death Troopers. He has like this really cool like cape and just outfit entirely. It's partially armor. It makes him look super intimidating and cool.
He's got the TIE fighter with the folding wings.
Yep, and it's Juan Carlo Esposito who played Gus Fring, and he's one of television's best actors. And he's so scary in this when he starts talking, and he knows he has so much control. And what I love is like they actually talk a little bit about his impulsiveness though. Taika Waititi does an incredible job of talking about it in that stormtrooper segment, that speeder trooper segment, where he's checking in, saying like, "We're at the rendezvous point. Like, at what point do we approach Moff Gideon?" And they're like, "He actually just wiped out an entire like segment of troopers, so you're gonna want to hold off." Well, he just murdered an Imperial officer for interrupting him, so like maybe hold off still. Like it's like he is cutthroat. He is a little impulsive. But at the same time, when he has full control of a situation like he does, he says, "You have until nightfall." It's kind of midday still, like towards the end of the day. Like he's basically like, "I have so much free time. Like you are in such peril. I can give you the rest of the day to like deal with, like come to terms with it." And it's like he just has this swagger to him as he's like, the moment he gets out of his folded wing TIE fighter and gets out, and not only that, but it has like the red accents on it. It just looks incredible. He is awesome. And I'm so happy that they saved him for just the very last episode. And then him busting out of the like, you see him busting out, you're like, oh, okay. When he was first introduced, though, and he says it's Moff Gideon, and it's like, well, how do you know? And he's like, I wasn't born on Mandalore. And then it does the flashback. I actually kind of expected Moff Gideon to actually be the Mandalorian that saved him. And then they flipped it on its head with my expectations and said no, he was the intelligence officer who oversaw Mandalore's destruction. So that's the way he has all of our information, because he is former Imperial intelligence.
Yeah.
And it's like,
speaking of intel, it was cool to get that little kind of, I don't know if you call it an Easter egg or a form of Easter egg / character background, but finding out that that the drop trooper, I forget her name.
That
She's
Kara
from
was
Alderaan.
from Alderaan.
Yeah, she's from Alderaan. Like, when's the last time you even heard Alderaan? You know?
Yeah, that was a really cool little moment of like, okay, well, yeah, I definitely get why she hates imps now, like, and so drastically. That also like feeds into one of my other like minor gripes though is like, and this isn't like exclusive to the Mandalorian, but like the inconsistencies between like how well known the Jedi are. Versus how quickly and easily people forget about them. And like we see this, it like, given the prominence of the Jedi in the prequel trilogy, like it seems absurd that so many people have like forgotten about them, and like that they're such a myth, 30 years down the line in the original trilogy, now into Mandalorian, and then future into the sequel trilogy. Like it's just, like I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, that would be the equivalent of like if 60 years ago just Christianity just pretty much disappeared. But like we would still know that 70 years ago Christianity was a giant thing, everybody. Like you don't suddenly just forget about that. So it's weird that like
I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, the sphere of influence the Jedi had. Two, that in a galaxy filled with billions upon billions of people, having tens of thousands of Jedis is not going to permeate all the way through. I think a third thing is that in the prequels, the story and the focus of the story is so centered on the Jedi and the Jedi Order that I think it's important to note that, it's not common for people to see Jedi outside of like Coruscant. And even then they usually stick to their temple. It's not like there is in the core worlds, I'd say you're far more common to see that. But if you're talking about Outer Rim, you're talking about Navarro, you're talking about Mandalore, like even though he didn't grow up on Mandalore, and he was a child during the Clone Wars, but he doesn't really know what a Jedi is explainable by not every unit of Imperial people, or not Imperial, but Republic troops were being led by Jedi. Just a few of
Yeah,
them.
I mean, it feels to me like they were enough of a force between the prequel trilogy and like the Clone Wars series that like as generals they were enough of a known factor in the Clone Wars, which
Mm-hmm.
was this like galaxy, spreading, battles and stuff that they would have a little bit more renown than like the show seems to play fast and loose with.
But I
And
think,
And
same
but
with the other trilogies. But that like so much of that is well, the original trilogy, like the Clone Wars, was a throwaway line that we never were probably going to ever
mm-hmm.
explore, and then going back and seeing like how the difference between like oh there's only a couple Jedi left to seeing as many Jedis as there were in the prequels. I think that was part of that is Lucas shot himself in the foot there. But it's just more of a like the rules aren't set up consistently enough for me to or they're not explored consistently enough to like warrant how many people just don't remember this
well,
you
it's
know
also important to put out
crazy
that
religious
also
sect across the universe.
there was, well, it's important to note that, like, yeah, it seems like there was this incredibly powerful religious sect, but unless you were involved in galactic politics on a high level, and on top of that, like, so Jedi are like these legendary figures for the majority of people in the galaxy, period, like just throughout even the Jedi's history. But you also have on top of that the massive amount of propaganda and scrubbing the galaxy's history of Jedi that the Empire did when it rose. The
Yeah.
the
But
purge of the Jedi wasn't just killing Jedi; it was purging the Jedi from the records of the Republic, and setting them up as basically being this weirdo quasi religion that the Empire wanted people to believe.
And if the stories took place like a couple hundred years apart from each other, I'd certainly buy into that more. But you have people that like were alive during all sequences of events here. So there's still enough of like an oral history that they would not have been able to actually eliminate to realistically feed into moments that like that are a lot of it is just making like a lot out of a small moment like this thing can move powers with its mind. Oh, that's that species belongs to an ancient sect, an ancient enemy of Mandalore, the Jedi or whatever, and that just being like, I think if that line hadn't been delivered in that way, I think I could have gotten behind that notion a little bit more, but just the way it's explored both in there and then also in like the sequel trilogies of like thinking that Han Solo and Luke Skywalker were a myth, where you wouldn't have that like the Empire has been squashing this the notions and stuff. Just people forget what happened 30 years ago in events that changed the course of the galaxy.
Well, it changes the course of the galaxy on an upper level, but for people living on Jakku, how much of like how much of the Luke Skywalker Han Solo story actually impacts your daily life?
Yeah, but I mean, enough to the fact that they like know the names and they know these people. They just the fact that they don't know if this thing that happened 30 years ago is real or not is where it gets a little bit murkier for me. But
Well,
I mean, I
it's
guess at the same time, it is like, oh, there are people that think the moon landing was faked and whatnot. And it's like, all right, well, yeah, I guess people
well,
are
yeah,
but
stupid.
and the thing of that
People
on
are
a
stupid in
galactic
every
scale.
galaxy.
yeah, I totally recognize that, but at the same time, those are just points in the movie where I just got to be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
if they say that nobody knows what the Force is, that nobody knows what the Jet, I just got to go with it. Otherwise, I'm just gonna stop enjoying it. And so for me, I'd rather enjoy where it's going, and so that's why I kind of go with
Well,
it. You know, like
also remember that in this, like in A New Hope, you have a guy who's on the Moff Council who makes fun of the Force as a hokey religion. So like it's not that like, and another thing is also they point out in the expanded universe, and I don't know how much they brought into the new one, this notion that even before the Empire started scrubbing Jedi history, there were a lot of people who thought the Jedi were just a bunch of like monks who played at being sorcerers, and somehow they had integrated themselves with the powerful elite of Coruscant, and so somehow they were. But also, it's also important to note, like maybe Jedi when they did travel to places didn't like outright say they were Jedi, because a lot of them are diplomats and researchers, etc. So there's a lot of different things about it that, on the top level, from what we experience in the prequels and even in the original trilogy, about these, and even Luke says you were a Jedi, and he's like, these things of like, what really is a Jedi? And he asked that question. It's like Luke's was born on Tatooine, where, and it's like you could believe that it's because he's a farm boy and he's been sheltered, but how many people like Luke were out there in the greater galaxy, especially out on the Outer Rim, where like the Mandalorian takes place? Like, it's we like to think that the Jedi were so important to the galaxy, but this is also a lesson that we learned from The Last Jedi. That the belief that the Jedi are the most important thing in the galaxy is arrogance. And I think that idea of like, yeah, it is arrogant of the Jedi to think that they were the most important thing in the galaxy, but it's also an important note that when we focus all of our stories of Star Wars on Jedi, we lose track of the, like, we're talking, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of people in this galaxy. How many people have gone their entire lives without even hearing the word Jedi because they live on like the central to outer, or the middle to outer rim in a podunk place that doesn't have too many people come through, much less Jedi. It's like it's important to note, like, the scope of the galaxy is so much far bigger than just what we've seen in the films.
Yeah, and
So,
like, those are all fair points. I just think like it jumps out at me.
Your points are very fair
enough
as well.
to be like, I wish there were more definitive justifications given for that. Like and it wasn't falling down to us debating about this, in a theoretical lore sense. I wish there were like an answer given.
It's all coming to you next in the next Star Wars story. Star Wars story, How We Forgot the Jedi. That's the spin-off just about how they forgot it. That's the next
Love and How I Learned to Calm Down and Forget the Jedi.
That does segue into one of the things that I was looking at while we were talking, because like one of the things I'm most excited about from the end of Mandalorian there is like, okay, well, like what happened between the end of Rebels and the Mandalorian here that wasn't centered around the original trilogy of movies, and I was like, did they I couldn't remember if they announced a new season of Rebels was coming or if it was a new season of Clone Wars, and it looks like it's a new season of Clone Wars. And I'm like, dang, because that doesn't seem like they're going to be able to tell this much, like, because I was like, oh, if there's like more Rebels coming, which I'm now extra hopeful that there will eventually be more Rebels coming, they can explore. Like they can bring Moff Gideon into like the Rebels story, and maybe that's where some of the characters are off, kind of encountering or trying to fight Moff Gideon even, or something like that. And having that crossover between kind of like I'm loving the crossover between the mediums of here's something that started in animated, but now it's making its way into live action series. Maybe it'll make its way into the movie someday. Maybe one of the movies we will be like, here's the forging of the Darksaber. Here's the story we're going to tell, or something like that. I'm excited for all of that in like the future of Star Wars. But given that like the announced currently thing for Disney Plus is another season of the Clone Wars, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm much more intrigued by like the more modern era of the stories that they can tell than going back and continuing to revisit between episodes 2 and 3. But more Star Wars is in my book still a good thing.
The more we can do to make Anakin's character in the films justifiable.
I mean, well, like there was so I love the Honest Trailers series, and that Screen Junkies puts out, and they did as like the follow up this last week. They did the animated Clone Wars movie, as like, regardless of what you think about Last Jedi or the debates that you're probably having about Rise of Skywalker, I think we can all agree that the Clone Wars is the worst like theatrically released Star Wars movie, and they kind of talk about that, and in particular, like there's a joke in there about see Anakin before he goes really bad. I mean, at this point, he's only killed a town of sand people, so like he's not completely terrible yet. But it is still like he's starting in episode 2. That guy becomes pretty vile. And the Clone Wars does like what it can to brush that aside, but it still has to live with that, history behind that
Well,
character.
it also says a lot about the otherism of Tusken Raiders
Yeah.
to the Star Wars people. Like, I murdered a bunch of these people, and it's like Padme basically tells them it's okay, they weren't people.
Yeah. Well, but bringing it back to the Mandalorian, there's that nice little moment where the Mandalorian is like speaking to them in sign language in that episode to get like to cross their lands, basically. Like he has respect for them, even if
Yeah.
30 plus years ago or whatever, Anakin and Padme did not.
Yeah, it's like, of course, a Mandalorian who's been adopted into a culture understands that cultural differences require, understanding of each other, and it's so. I love that moment in that episode because it's just like, he tells him what he wants. He goes, "What? No." It's like, yeah. Then you're not gonna be able to make it through. So good, so good. So let's talk about some of these middle episodes. A lot of people are like, "Oh, they're weak." It's like, man, I don't like. No, stop it. I love these episodes. I love that they're bringing in these incredible actors, just to do like a small guest appearance. Will they die? Will they not die? Will their character be thrown in a prison cell on a like a space jailer that no longer has humans on it, so it's just being manned by droids till it ends up slowly into prison?
I didn't realize that episode. I didn't realize until I was like reading through some of the like full season Easter eggs. I didn't realize that the one like New Republic guy on that ship is the voice of Anakin in the Clone Wars.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
There's wonderful little Easter eggs throughout the show. The droid in that episode is voiced by Richard Ayoade.
Yep.
Who is a hilarious British comedic actor.
Yep.
Who I adore, and he just, the way that he's so derogatory is just like, this is perfect for him. Richard Ayoade is just killing it. Once again, the droid actors of Tiki Watiti and Richard Ayoade in this series are phenomenal.
Yeah. Clancy Brown plays the big guy in that, who obviously played some pivotal roles in both Clone Wars and Rebels. So getting to see him like in a Star Wars live action thing was really cool. A nice little like nod to his legacy within the series.
Oh man, and then like just I forgot who I was talking to about it. I think it was my brother-in-law I was talking to about it, and it's about how like the pacing in that episode is like really weirdly off, because in the time that it takes for the Mandalorian to like get backstabbed, thrown into the jail cell, get his way out of the jail cell, slowly take down each member of his former crew, and then also make it back with the bounty to the guy, puts the tracker on him, which leads the X-Wing fleet to fire on them. In the time that all that took, it's supposed to be like 15 minutes, and it's like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, that's an issue, I think, that both that has, as well as the Rise of Skywalker. Without getting into spoilers for Rise of Skywalker, I would much sooner see Star Wars start just like not specifying the times of things, because when they put on a ticking clock, like that's just exactly what's going through your mind, is like, feels like more time has passed than you said was supposed to pass for this to have all happened.
More time has passed in the running point of this episode.
I mean, so like it's his estimate. So like I'm gonna go ahead and pull a U to help justify
Fair
it.
enough. Fair enough.
So it's his estimate, and then as soon as he does like get away with it and take it off the ship, now those X-wings that were maybe en route to that thing have to be en route to follow him to the next place that they're going. So they have to like recalibrate and redirect themselves.
Totally
because
fair.
They basically just have something that says, "Hey, kill whatever is like submitting this signal." And so, that thing is now moving. Okay, we got to go hunt it down and kill it. The fact that they only send 3 ships, also a problem, because like they don't know if that's a bigger thing or not. But whatever.
It's great.
But even that's like, those are like the 3 pilots there are all directors from the series, Dave Filoni, as well as Deborah Chow, and I forget who the third one is. But each of them like directed episodes of the series. Deborah Chow in particular is going to be the showrunner for the Obi-Wan series, so I'm excited for that.
I'm very excited. Her
and maybe,
episode was so good.
Yeah, And that's like the Obi-Wan is another like Mandalorian going in and like as much like enjoying that show as much as I did with characters I didn't know anything about. Um, Great. The fact that we're getting Ewan McGregor to come back and like
Mm-hmm.
play Obi-Wan in the like in between episodes 3 and 4, I'm extra excited for that. I almost wish they hadn't already explored the Obi-Wan Darth Maul end of that story in Rebels so that they could explore it here. Because I remember when Darth Maul shows up in Solo, I was like, oh, that'll be really cool if they make this rumored Obi-Wan movie and that ties these like disparate Star Wars stories together. That like some of these characters, like Darth Maul and uh, Emilia Clarke's character, maybe we don't get a Solo 2, but maybe those characters kind of carry into the
Mm-hmm.
Obi-Wan movie, and we get to see kind of where that story goes. But they've
Rebels.
also already explored some of that um, in
Hey,
Rebels. And that doesn't
Let's
mean
get
they
that
won't
moment again in live
explore it
action.
in
Let's do it.
Obi-Wan,
Like
but
I'm okay with that, but also it's like Dave Filoni
yeah,
wrote that years ago before he knew that we were gonna be getting an Obi-Wan. Yeah, so like it's fair. It's
before they were
fair.
going to get any of this stuff, yeah. But yeah, all in all, Mandalorian, really good. I
Mm-hmm.
Oh
uh,
gosh, we gotta close this
we
episode
we're
out.
nearing 2.5 hours, so I'm gonna go ahead and close out the show as this is a record for that nerdy site show this week. Mandalorian and Little Women was a weird combination, but I love it, and it was great chatting with you guys about it. And yeah, like I really enjoyed Mandalorian start to finish. It has some moments, as pretty much any Star Wars thing does, that I was like, I could have done without that or whatnot. But it also has those like moments that just fill you with like magic and joy and wonder
Oh,
that I
Baby Yoda's
enjoyed,
the best thing
i.e.,
that's ever been
everything
made.
Baby Yoda that we get in that series was absolutely
Which
adored. So
shout out to Kate from But Why though for coining the
I
pet
like
name
that.
of
Yodito.
Yodito.
Yodito,
Since the Mandalorian is a Latinx character and he's the father of Baby Yoda, we had a large chunk of
I like
Latinx
that a lot. I
Twitters
like Yodito.
calling him Yodito,
nice,
little Yoda.
very cool. What did you guys real quick as one last thing on Mandalorian? What did you think about like him taking the helmet off to like? Because we all knew Pedro Pascal was the actor underneath, but like,
Yeah.
what did we think of the actual moment that like has been built up that he doesn't take his helmet off, and we see him take his helmet off in this?
I'd say one is that I love that it was the IG-13 that did it, or IG-11. Yeah,
IG-11. Yeah.
IG-11 that was the one that did it because it was like the first enemy that he had to like enemy slash ally he had to deal with in the first episode, and I think that it carries over to the more he's kind of seeing IG-11 as like he's grown on IG-11 to the point where he's starting to think that he's like a living thing. And IG-11 is quick to point out, he goes, well, I'm a loophole in your thing about not being able to let people see who are alive see you because I'm not actually a living thing. So let me go ahead and do this and like heal your head. And my favorite part of that was he's like I'm about to die. Like let me die a warrior's death. Let me like I'd rather you kill me than some imp. And he like takes off the helmet and like starts spraying him, and you just see like this like relief wash over. Pedro Pascal's such a great actor. And IG-11 says, you've had serious damage to your central processing unit, and Pedro Pascal's just like,
Oh.
You mean my brain?
Like he's so out
Yes,
of it.
that was a joke to
Alleviate,
ease
yeah,
your tension. Or
alleviate the
whatever.
situation. It's just like a.
Yeah,
I love that K2SO energy.
I loved
kind
that
of,
moment. I thought the specifically calling out "I am no living thing" or whatever was a little more heavy-handed. Like in part because like I could see where they were going with that story 2 minutes before they said that line, and so I was like,
Mhm.
you didn't really need to hit the nail on the head on that one, for me, and again, like a lot of this goes back to like I just wish they hadn't set up the like he has to have his helmet on in the first place, because it 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 was built up to be such a big thing, and it I'm still of a mixed bag in terms of like if I feel like they earned the payoff of it or not. Because I think to what Christian was saying earlier, like I hearing the in review guys talk about it over at Kind of Funny, they talk about that moment being so much more about like him accepting of like IG-11 as opposed to like honoring the creed or whatever in that moment. I don't know if it needed the helmet being taken off as like accepting
Well,
that.
it's also important to note
So
that he had a serious concussion and was bleeding out the back of his head. So,
sure, yeah,
me-
but I mean like
also,
that.
he didn't take
That's
off his
again
own
they
helmet.
they wrote themselves
IG
into that moment.
IG-11's the one that took off his helmet. He did not take off the helmet.
Yeah, yeah,
But he also did not choose to pull the trigger
uh,
on the gun. Once again, concussions. They're serious business, folks, even in Star Wars. I will say, last shout out to Werner Herzog. It's important to note that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau weren't sure that the puppet Baby Yoda would be enough, so they were preparing for a like CGI Baby Yoda and some alternate cuts. And Werner Herzog very famously looked at them, and when he found out that they were doing that, he called them cowards.
yeah. I think we've talked about that with you on this.
We might
show
have.
as well.
It's important to reiterate it that Werner Herzog is one of the leading reasons why we have Baby Yoda as he is. And also, just, he was an incredible actor in it. But also the fact that, like, he, in all of his interviews, he clearly is, like, the biggest fan of Baby Yoda is awesome.
He's smitten with it. That was another thing. Like, I mentioned back, I think we talked about Mandalorian back, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago, right after the episode with the ATST had come out, and I made mention of like I hated that all of those kids knew about Baby Yoda months before we did.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
And as the series has continued on, it has been more like I hate that Amy Sedaris knew about Baby Yoda before we did. I hate that Jason Sudeikis knew about Baby Yoda before we, like so much of that is just like
how did they keep it a secret?
So many
like,
of
how did they keep it a
so
secret?
many of you people did not tell us of this amazing, delightful thing, and you have just gotten to keep it to yourselves for 6 months to a year, however long ago that stuff was shot. I despise you all, and I just have never-ending wells of jealousy towards those people that got an extra 6 months with Baby Yoda that we did not get. But anyway, that's gonna do it for this week's show. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me for this. I did not think we were going to run this long, but the conversation was great, and I appreciate it. You can follow Cameron at RevCabot, 2 B's and 2 T's. Anything you want to shout out, Cameron?
Not right now. By the time this episode goes live, stuff I'm working on probably has not been put out yet. So
Okay. You can follow Christian at PixelBrave. Anything you want to shout out, Christian?
Well, if you follow at PixelBrave, you should see a vlog coming up later today. Just, I mean, if you're listening to this, you already know about my involvement in That Nerdy Site, but I guess now you can watch me talk a little bit about my involvement, and a second vlog talking about the anime podcast that'll be releasing soon, and I'll probably be announcing that when to expect the first episode, which is very soon. Where the kind of official pilot relaunch of what I wanted to make as far as an anime podcast.
Great. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey, and kind of echoing Christian's shout out for that anime pod, that D Plus show, celebrating all things Disney Plus, should be coming out here in the next couple weeks as well. Looking forward to getting the ball rolling on that show. Thanks to everybody who supported us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can follow everything we do over at That Nerdy Site. Check out thatnerdysite.com for the latest content in terms of reviews. The podcasts I'll post over there. And eventually we'll get up and running on video content, as well as hopefully get back into the throes of Twitch content. Like I said, I'm going to try and do The Witcher 3 is kind of the game I want to dive into, and I think I'm going to try and like make that a streaming game that I'll just play, in the evenings as a nice way to unwind from the day. So I'll probably try and do that over at twitch.tv/thatnerdysite. If you liked what you heard today, please rate, review, like, subscribe, maybe even consider supporting us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of this show, which we will be recording the December early access shortly after we wrap on this talking about Christmas memories and kind of some of that stuff. So check that out if you want to support us over there. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Cameron and Christian, for joining me. And as always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.